The telegram trembled in Clara Weston's gloved hands as the Wyoming wind tore at her veil. Marriage arrangement terminated. Do not proceed. Deepest regrets. 23 years old, abandoned at a frontier train station in a torn wedding dress, surrounded by strangers who wouldn't meet her eyes. Then a deep voice cut through her shock. You've been left at the altar. She looked up at the tall rancher with desperate blue eyes and two wild-haired little girls clinging to his legs. Come with me, he said quietly. My twins need a mother like you. Before we begin Clara's journey from heartbreak to hope, please stay with me until the very end of this story. And comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale of second chances has traveled across the world. The train's whistle screamed one final time before the great iron beast hissed and groaned its way out of Cheyenne Station, leaving Clara Weston standing alone on a wooden platform that seemed to stretch into eternity. The November afternoon sun hung low and pale in the Wyoming sky, casting long shadows that made everything look skeletal and unforgiving. Her white traveling dress, the one she'd sewn so carefully back in Boston, with pearl buttons she'd saved 3 months to afford, was streaked with coal dust and torn at the hem where she'd caught it on the train's steps in her hurry to disembark. In her shaking hands, the telegram felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Marriage arrangement terminated. Do not proceed to Laramie. Circumstances beyond control. Deepest regrets. J. Patterson. Clara read it again, though the words hadn't changed in the 6 times she'd stared at them since the conductor had handed it to her with apologetic eyes just as the train was pulling into the station. Each word was a nail driven into the coffin of the future she'd imagined for herself. The modest house James Patterson had described in his letters, the mercantile shop he managed, the quiet life of respectability she'd been promised after months of correspondence. Gone. All of it. Gone. Around her, the platform was clearing quickly. Other passengers hurried toward waiting carriages or into the station house, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. A woman in an emerald traveling suit glanced at Clara, took in the white dress and the trunk sitting beside her like a gravestone, and quickly looked away. Clara saw the recognition in the woman's eyes, saw the pity, and felt her cheeks burn with humiliation that went bone deep. She was a mail-order bride who'd been refused delivery. The thought came with such bitter clarity that Clara almost laughed, except she was afraid if she started, it would turn into sobbing, and she'd promised herself on the train, after she'd locked herself in the cramped water closet and pressed her face into her hands for a full 10 minutes, that she wouldn't cry in public. Not here. Not where everyone could see. Miss? Miss, are you quite all right? Clara turned to find an elderly porter approaching, his weathered face creased with concern. He was looking at her the way one might look at a wounded animal, and something in Clara's chest twisted painfully. I'm perfectly well, thank you, she managed, her Boston accent sounding absurdly proper and out of place in this rough frontier town. I'm simply waiting. Waiting for someone? The porter glanced around the now nearly empty platform. Only I'm meant to close up the station house soon, and it's getting cold. There's a boarding house just up the street if you need... I'll be fine. Clara's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. The porter's kindness was somehow worse than the woman's pity had been. Thank you for your concern. The old man hesitated, clearly wanting to help, but not knowing how, before finally tipping his hat and shuffling away. Clara watched him go, then turned to stare at the empty tracks stretching away into the vast Wyoming landscape. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. The sky seemed impossibly huge here, so different from the narrow streets and close-built houses of Boston. Everything was bigger, wilder, more untamed, and she was completely, utterly alone. The afternoon she'd spent imagining this moment came back to her with cruel vividness. In her fantasies, James Patterson would have been waiting on this very platform, hat in hand, perhaps with flowers. He'd smile that warm smile she'd imagined from his carefully written letters, take her hand, and welcome her to her new life. They'd be married by week's end in a simple ceremony. She'd finally have a home, a husband, a place to belong after years of being passed between relatives who treated her like an obligation after her parents died. Instead, she had a telegram that offered no explanation, no apology beyond deepest regrets, and a one-way ticket that had emptied her meager savings. Claire's hand moved to the small purse hanging from her wrist. Inside was everything she had left in the world. $4.37, a tintype photograph of her parents, and a tortoiseshell comb that had belonged to her mother. That was it. The sum total of Clara Weston's worldly possessions, besides the trunk at her feet that held 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, some undergarments, a Bible, and a few books she'd been unable to part with. $4 wouldn't get her back to Boston, even if she'd wanted to return to her cousin Margaret's cramped apartment and those disapproving looks. It wouldn't last more than a week or 2 at a boarding house. She had no trade beyond basic sewing and some experience helping in Margaret's millinery shop. What did women do in places like this? The few establishments she could see from the station looked rough and masculine. Saloons with swinging doors, a blacksmith's forge, buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. This was a town built by men, for men, and Clara suddenly felt more out of place than she ever had in her life. "You've been left at the altar." The voice came from behind her, deep and quiet, and stating it as fact rather than question. Clara spun around, one hand flying to her chest, her heart hammering. The man standing 10 feet away was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He wore work clothes, canvas trousers, a shirt that had once been white but was now the color of prairie dust, and a leather vest. His dark hair was shaggy, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes were the most startling shade of blue Clara had ever seen, like the sky over the ocean on a clear summer day. But what truly captured her attention were the 2 small figures half hiding behind his legs. Twin girls, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with matching red-gold curls that tumbled down their backs in wild tangles. They wore simple cotton dresses in different colors, one blue, one green, both stained and wrinkled as though they'd been playing hard. Their faces were smudged with dirt, and they stared at Clara with the frank, curious intensity that only children possess. Clara started, then stopped. What could she possibly say to this stranger? That yes, she'd been abandoned, that her carefully planned future had disintegrated before she'd even arrived? "I don't believe that's any of your concern, sir." She meant for it to sound dignified and dismissive, but her voice wavered on the last word, betraying her. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those blue eyes. Not pity, exactly, but understanding, as though he knew what it felt like to have your world collapse. "My name is Luke McAllister," he said, making no move to come closer. "I own a ranch about an hour's ride west of here, Wind Creek Ranch." He paused, and one of the little girls tugged on his trouser leg. He reached down absently, placing a large hand on her red-gold curls. "These are my daughters. Rosie," he indicated the girl in blue, "and Lily, the one in green." Clara nodded stiffly, unsure why this man was introducing himself or what he could possibly want with her. "I'm Clara Weston, from Boston." "I know." "You know?" Clara's brow furrowed. "How could you possibly—" "I was at the telegraph office when your wire came through," Luke McAllister said. "Couldn't help but overhear the operator reading it out. Patterson's a coward for doing this to you." The blunt assessment made Clara's face burn hotter, so the whole town probably knew by now. The telegraph operator had no doubt shared the story with everyone who came through. By tomorrow, she'd be the subject of gossip and speculation, the poor mail-order bride who'd been rejected before she even arrived. "Papa says you need help," the little girl called Rosie piped up suddenly, stepping out from behind her father's leg. "He says you got nowhere to go, and that's very sad." "Rosie," Luke's voice held a note of warning, but the child pressed on, undeterred. "Are you really going to be married? You got a pretty dress for it." She pointed at Clara's white traveling dress with its torn hem and coal stains. "I was meant to be," Clara heard herself say, though she hadn't intended to respond. There was something disarming about the child's directness. But plans changed. "Our mama's dead," Lily announced matter-of-factly, stepping forward to join her sister. "She died 2 winters ago. Papa says she's in heaven with the angels, but I think that's a long way away, and I miss her." "Lily." Luke's voice was sharper this time, and the little girl's mouth snapped shut, but she continued staring at Clara with those wide, curious eyes. Clara felt something catch in her chest. Children who'd lost their mother. She knew what that felt like, though she'd been older when her own parents died, old enough to understand the permanence of loss, but still young enough to feel utterly unmoored by it. "I'm very sorry for your loss," she said softly, directing the words to the girls rather than their father. Luke McAllister cleared his throat. "Mrs. Danner, that's our housekeeper. She does her best, but—" He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "The girls are getting to an age where they need more than I can give them. Need someone who can teach them proper, help them with things that—" He gestured vaguely, clearly struggling with the words. Clara waited, still not understanding where this strange conversation was leading. Finally, Luke McAllister looked directly at her, his blue eyes intense and earnest. "Come with me. To Wind Creek Ranch. My twins need a mother like you." For a moment, Clara was certain she'd misheard. The wind had picked up, whistling through the station, and surely it had carried his words away before they reached her properly. But no. He was still looking at her, waiting for a response, and the two little girls were bouncing on their toes with barely contained excitement. "I beg your pardon?" Clara's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I'm not proposing marriage," Luke said quickly, as though reading her shock. "Not right away, at least. I'm proposing a position. As governess to my daughters. You'd have room and board, a small salary. Mrs. Danner could use the help around the house, and the girls—" He glanced down at them. "They need someone to teach them their letters, their manners, all the things their mother would have—" His voice caught slightly, and he cleared his throat again. "All the things they need to know." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. A governess? On a ranch in the middle of Wyoming territory? It was absurd. It was impossible. She'd come here to be a merchant's wife in a proper town, not to teach children on some isolated ranch. And yet, what other options did she have? She could take her $4 and find a boarding house, then what? Look for work in Cheyenne? As what? The town clearly wasn't large enough to support a milliner or a dress shop, and she had no other skills to speak of. She could try to send a telegram to Cousin Margaret, but that would mean admitting her failure, begging to come back to Boston and live on Margaret's charity, enduring those pitying looks and the endless subtle reminders that Clara was a burden. Or she could get back on a train, except she didn't have money for a ticket anywhere, and even if she did, where would she go? She had no family besides Margaret, no friends who could take her in, no prospects whatsoever. "How long?" Clara asked, the words coming out before she'd fully decided to speak them. Luke's expression shifted slightly, something like hope flickering across his features. 2 weeks, he said. "Give us 2 weeks. If it doesn't suit, I'll pay your passage back to wherever you want to go. I give you my word on that." 2 weeks. 14 days to figure out what to do with her life. 14 days of having a roof over her head and food in her stomach while she made a plan. And if nothing else, she'd be earning a bit of money. Enough, perhaps, to give her more options than she currently had. Clara looked at the twin girls, who were watching her with identical expressions of hopeful anticipation. They were sweet-faced beneath the grime, with their mother's absence written in the wrinkles of their dresses and the tangles in their hair. Something in her heart, which she'd thought had gone completely numb over the past few hours, gave a small, painful twist. "I'd need to know more about the position," she said carefully. "The specific expectations, the salary, the living arrangements. We can discuss all that on the drive to the ranch," Luke interrupted, and now there was definitely hope in his voice. "I promise you, Miss Weston, this is all above board. Mrs. Danner has been with us for years. She'll chaperone, act as your companion, and the ranch house has plenty of space. You'd have your own room, complete privacy." Clara looked back at the empty platform, at the tracks leading away into the distance, at the sun sinking lower toward those distant mountains. Then she looked at Luke McAllister and his 2 daughters, at the earnestness in his face and the wild hope in theirs. What did she have to lose that she hadn't already lost? 2 weeks, she said firmly. "I'll give you 2 weeks, Mr. McAllister. After that, we'll reassess." The smile that broke across Luke McAllister's face transformed him entirely, taking years off his weathered features. "Thank you, Miss Weston. You won't regret this, I promise you." Rosie and Lily let out simultaneous squeals of delight and rushed forward, nearly bowling Clara over in their enthusiasm. They grabbed her hands, chattering excitedly over each other. You can sleep in the blue room, Rosie announced. No, the yellow room, Lily countered. The blue room has spiders. Does not. Does too. I saw one last week, big as Papa's hand. Girls, that's enough. Luke's voice was gentle but firm. He reached down and scooped up Clara's trunk as though it weighed nothing, hefting it onto his shoulder. Miss Weston's had a long journey. Let's get her to the wagon so she can rest. He started walking toward the street, and the girls tugged Clara along after him, still arguing good-naturedly about room assignments and spiders and whether Mrs. Danner would make her special cinnamon rolls for breakfast tomorrow if they asked nicely. Clara let herself be pulled along, her mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. 10 minutes ago, she'd been standing on that platform certain her life was over. Now she was following a strange man and his daughters toward an uncertain future on a ranch she'd never heard of. It was madness. It was reckless. It was completely unlike anything Clara Weston had ever done in her careful, proper life. And yet, as they emerged onto the street and she saw the wagon waiting, a sturdy farm wagon with 2 patient horses, Clara felt something she hadn't expected to feel again today. She felt a tiny, fragile flutter of hope. Luke McAllister lifted her trunk into the wagon bed with practiced ease, then turned to help her up onto the seat. His hands were work-roughened and strong as they steadied her, and she noticed he was careful not to let them linger longer than necessary. A gentleman's gesture, even here in this rough country. The girls scrambled up into the back, settling themselves on some folded blankets amid various supplies, bags of flour and sugar, coils of rope, a new axe handle. Luke climbed up beside Clara and gathered the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. As they rolled away from the station, Clara turned for one last look at the platform where she'd stood just minutes ago. The porter was closing the station house doors for the night, and the shadows had grown longer, swallowing up the place where her old dreams had died. Miss Weston? Luke's voice drew her attention forward again. I want you to know I appreciate this. More than I can say. The girls, He glanced back at his daughters, who were already absorbed in some imaginative game involving the rope coils. His voice dropped lower, meant only for Clara's ears. They've been so lost without their mother. I've tried, but He shook his head. I'm not enough. They need someone who can give them what I can't. Clara studied his profile as he drove. The strong line of his jaw, the lines around his eyes, that spoke of squinting into the sun and too many sleepless nights. There was grief there, she realized. Old grief, worn smooth by time, but never fully healed. Tell me about your wife, she said quietly. If you don't mind speaking of her. Luke was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. They turned onto a dirt road leading west, leaving the last buildings of Cheyenne behind. The landscape opened up into rolling prairie, golden grass rippling in the wind like waves on an ocean. Finally, he spoke. Her name was Martha Ann Reeves, before we married. I met her at a church social in Denver. I'd gone there to buy breeding stock for the ranch. She was visiting her aunt, and a small smile touched his lips at the memory. She had the prettiest laugh I'd ever heard, like music. Within a week, I knew I wanted to marry her. How long were you married? Clara asked. 8 years. Good years, mostly. Hard sometimes. The ranch life is hard, and Martha, she'd been raised in town, wasn't used to the isolation. But she loved the girls more than anything. His hands tightened slightly on the reins. It was pneumonia. Came on fast that winter. One day she was fine, cooking breakfast and singing to the girls. 3 days later, he didn't finish the sentence. I'm sorry, Clara said, and meant it. Behind them, Rosie's voice rose in protest. That's not how you play it. You're supposed to be the horse, not the rider. But I want to be the rider, Lily argued back. Luke glanced back with a mixture of exasperation and affection. Girls, settle down back there. Miss Weston's trying to rest. I don't mind, Clara said, surprising herself. The truth was, their squabbling was almost comforting, normal, childish, full of life. After the numbness of the past few hours, it was a reminder that the world kept turning, that joy and argument and ordinary moments continued regardless of personal tragedy. They drove on as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The prairie seemed to stretch forever in every direction, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings or clusters of scrub pine. It was beautiful in a stark, lonely way that made Claire's throat tight. "Do you miss Boston?" Luke asked after a while. Claire considered the question. "I miss the idea of Boston," she said slowly. "I miss having a place where I belonged, or thought I did. But the city itself?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I lived with my cousin after my parents died. Her apartment was small, and she had 3 children of her own. I was in the way, always in the way." "Hence the advertisement," Luke said, understanding in his voice. "Hence the advertisement," Clara agreed. She'd answered James Patterson's listing in a matrimonial newspaper after seeing dozens like it. Western men seeking educated, respectable wives. It had seemed like a solution, a chance to build a new life, to have a home of her own, to be wanted rather than merely tolerated. The irony that she'd traveled halfway across the country only to find herself in exactly the same position, unwanted, in the way, was not lost on her. Except Luke McAllister had asked her to come with him, had said his daughters needed her. It wasn't the same as being wanted, perhaps, but it was something. For now, it was enough. "Papa, I'm hungry," Rosie announced from the back of the wagon. "Can we stop and eat the biscuits Mrs. Danner packed?" "May we stop?" Clara corrected automatically, then froze. She'd just been hired as their governess, but correcting the children before she'd even arrived at the ranch seemed presumptuous. But Luke was smiling. "You hear that, Rosie? Miss Weston's already teaching you proper grammar. And yes, you may have a biscuit, both of you, but just one each. We'll have supper when we get home." The girls cheered and dug into a basket tucked under the wagon seat, emerging with large, fluffy biscuits that they attacked with enthusiasm. Rosie held one up to Clara. "Want one, Miss Weston? They're real good. Mrs. Danner makes the best biscuits in all of Wyoming." Clara's stomach, which she'd thought was too knotted with anxiety to accept food, suddenly rumbled loudly. She realized she hadn't eaten since a hurried breakfast on the train that morning, and even that had only been a stale roll and weak coffee. "Thank you," she said, accepting the biscuit. It was still slightly warm, and when she bit into it, the buttery, fluffy interior melted on her tongue. "Oh," she breathed, "this is delicious." "Told you," Rosie said triumphantly. "Mrs. Danner's the best cook ever. Sometimes she makes cinnamon rolls on Sundays, and they're even better than the biscuits." "Only sometimes Papa won't let us have more than one," Lily added with an aggrieved sigh. "He says we'll spoil our supper, but I don't think you can spoil supper with cinnamon rolls. That doesn't make sense." Clara found herself smiling despite everything. "Your father's probably right, though. Too many sweets aren't good for you." Both girls groaned dramatically, and Luke laughed, a real laugh that lit up his whole face. "I like her already," he said to his daughters. "She's on my side." As they continued west, the conversation flowed more easily. The girls peppered Clara with questions. Had she really come all the way from Boston? What was it like on the train? Had she seen any Indians? Did she know how to read books with lots of words? Could she sew? Could she make doll clothes? Did she know any songs? Clara answered as best she could, feeling herself relaxing incrementally. These were just children, she reminded herself. Motherless children who needed guidance and care. She could provide that, at least for 2 weeks. It wasn't the future she'd imagined, but it was a future nonetheless. The landscape began to change as they drove, becoming more rolling, with rocky hills rising in the distance. Trees appeared more frequently, cottonwoods and aspens that would be bare of leaves within a few weeks. They forded a shallow creek, the water burbling cheerfully over smooth stones, and climbed up the other side into grassland dotted with cattle. "This is Wind Creek Ranch," Luke said, gesturing at the land around them. 3,000 acres, give or take. Not the biggest spread in these parts, but it's ours, and it's productive. We run about 200 head of cattle, some horses. I've got 3 ranch hands who help with the work. Good men, respectful. They have their own bunkhouse well away from the main house. Clara nodded, trying to take it all in. 3,000 acres. She couldn't even imagine that much land. Back in Boston, Margaret's entire apartment building probably sat on less than an acre. "There's the house," Lily said, pointing eagerly. Clara looked ahead and saw it nestled in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by rolling hills. It was a 2-story structure built of logs and stone, larger than she'd expected, with a wide front porch and stone chimneys at each end. Smoke curled from one chimney, carrying the promise of warmth and food. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, a stable, what looked like a chicken coop, and a smaller structure that must be the bunkhouse Luke had mentioned. As they approached, the front door of the house burst open and a woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. She was short and round, with iron gray hair pulled back in a bun, and a face that looked stern until she smiled. "About time you got back," she called out. "Supper's been ready this past half hour?" She stopped abruptly as she caught sight of Clara. "Luke McAllister, who in heaven's name is that?" "Mrs. Danner, meet Miss Clara Weston," Luke said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "She's going to be the girls' new governess." Mrs. Danner's eyes went wide as saucers. "They're what? Since when did we—" "Luke McAllister, you get down here this instant and explain yourself." Luke climbed down from the wagon, then turned to help Clara descend. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her elbow until she found her footing. "Miss Weston found herself in an unfortunate situation in town," Luke said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's agreed to stay with us for a trial period, teach the girls their lessons, help them with their manners and such. I offered her room and board plus $20 a month." Mrs. Danner's expression cycled through several emotions: surprise, skepticism, concern, before settling on something that looked like cautious approval. She approached Clara, studying her with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "Abandoned bride," she said finally. It wasn't a question. Clara felt her cheeks burn, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, ma'am." "Not your fault, I'd wager," Mrs. Danner said briskly. "Men can be damned fools, pardon my language." She turned to Luke. $20 in room and board, you said?" "That's right." "Make it 25, Mrs. Danner said firmly. "Lord knows I could use the help, and if she's going to be teaching these wild children, no offense, girls, she deserves fair wages." "Mrs. Danner," Luke started. 25, the housekeeper repeated, brooking no argument. "Or I'll tell everyone at church next Sunday about that time you tried to cook your own supper and nearly burned down the kitchen." Luke's ears turned red. "That was one time, and the curtains barely singed." He stopped, seeing Mrs. Danner's raised eyebrow. "Fine, $25 a month." Mrs. Danner nodded with satisfaction, then turned back to Clara. "I'm Harriet Danner, Miss Weston. I've been keeping house for this family going on 12 years now. You'll take your meals with us, and your room's just down the hall from the girls. Close enough to hear if they need you in the night, far enough for privacy. I'll expect you to pull your weight with household chores when the girls are at their studies, and I won't tolerate any airs or nonsense. We work hard here, but we work together. Understood?" It was the longest speech Clara had heard from anyone all day, and despite everything, she found herself warming to this gruff, no-nonsense woman. "Understood, Mrs. Danner." "Good." Mrs. Danner's stern expression softened slightly. "You look dead on your feet, child. Luke, you and the hands can unload her trunk. Girls, help me get another plate set. Miss Weston, you come with me and wash up. Supper's pot roast and it's getting cold." She turned and marched back toward the house, clearly expecting Clara to follow. Clara glanced at Luke, who gave her an encouraging nod, then at the girls, who were already racing after Mrs. Danner, shouting about who got to show Miss Weston her room. Clara followed more slowly, her mind still struggling to process the dramatic turn her life had taken. This morning, she'd been on a train, nervous but hopeful about meeting her intended husband. Tonight, she was walking into a stranger's home on a Wyoming ranch, having agreed to become governess to twin girls she'd met less than 2 hours ago. Madness. Absolute madness. And yet, as she stepped through the front door into a warm, lantern-lit room that smelled of pot roast and fresh bread, as she heard the girls' laughter echoing from somewhere upstairs and felt Mrs. Danner's brisk, capable presence beside her, Clara felt that tiny flutter of hope grow just a little bit stronger. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be a disaster after all. "Come on then," Mrs. Danner said, leading her down a hallway past a large sitting room in what looked like Luke's study. "Your room's just here. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and the bed's comfortable. The girls are right next door. You'll hear them through the walls sometimes, I'm afraid. They're not the quietest sleepers." She opened a door to reveal a modest but pleasant room with whitewashed walls, a simple brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was small, but infinitely better than the cramped corner Clara had occupied in Margaret's apartment. "The necessaries out back," Mrs. Danner continued, "but we keep chamber pots under the beds for nighttime. Fresh water in the pitcher every morning. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6. We keep ranch hours here, early to bed, early to rise. Any questions?" Clara shook her head, overwhelmed by the practical kindness in Mrs. Danner's tone. "No, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Danner's expression gentled. "You've had a rough day, I expect. But you're safe here, Miss Weston. Luke's a good man, even if he can be thick-headed sometimes. He won't let any harm come to you, and neither will I. Now wash up quick and come to supper. You need food in you." She bustled out, leaving Clara alone in her new room. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the dying light painting the hills in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, she could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing. Somewhere, a bird called out its evening song. She thought of the telegram still tucked in her purse. Marriage arrangement terminated. Perhaps it had been. But standing here in this simple room, listening to the sounds of a family preparing for supper below, Clara Weston realized that maybe, just maybe, one life ending might mean another was beginning. She wasn't a mail-order bride anymore. She wasn't Clara Weston, the poor relation taking up space in someone else's home. She was a governess, a teacher, someone who was needed. It wasn't what she'd planned, but as she washed the coal dust from her face and smoothed her hair, preparing to go down to her first meal at Wind Creek Ranch, Clara found herself thinking that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never planned at all. They were simply the ones you were brave enough to say yes to. The pot roast was the best thing Clara had tasted in months, perhaps years. Mrs. Danner served it with roasted potatoes, carrots glazed with butter and honey, and thick slices of bread that were still warm from the oven. Clara tried to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of proper manners, but her stomach had other ideas after a day of near starvation. She found herself reaching for a second helping before she'd quite finished the first. "That's it. Eat up," Mrs. Danner said approvingly from her seat at the foot of the long wooden table. "You're thin as a rail. Don't they feed people in Boston?" "Mrs. Danner," Luke said mildly, a note of warning in his voice. "I'm just saying what's true," the housekeeper replied, unrepentant. She turned back to Clara. "No offense meant, dear, just that you could use some meat on your bones. A few weeks of my cooking will fix that right up." Clara found herself smiling despite her exhaustion. "No offense taken, Mrs. Danner, and you're right, this is wonderful. I haven't had a meal this good in a very long time." Across the table, Rosie was pushing her carrots around her plate with a fork, making a face. "Do I have to eat all of them?" "Every last one," Luke said without looking up from his own plate. "You know the rule." "But they're squishy," Rosie complained. "They're glazed, not squishy," Mrs. Danner corrected. "And your father's right. Clean your plate or no dessert." "There's dessert?" Lily's head popped up, her eyes bright with interest. "Apple tart," Mrs. Danner said. "But only for girls who finish their supper without complaining." Rosie sighed dramatically, but began eating her carrots with exaggerated reluctance. Clara watched the exchange with amusement, seeing the well-worn patterns of family life playing out. There was comfort in the routine, in the gentle discipline and the promise of dessert, in the way Luke and Mrs. Danner worked together to manage the girls without ever seeming to discuss it. It reminded her painfully of her own childhood before everything had fallen apart. Her father carving the roast at Sunday dinner, her mother gently correcting Clara's posture at the table. The ordinary moments she'd taken for granted until they were gone. "Miss Weston?" Luke's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I thought tomorrow we could go over the girls' lessons. See where they're at with their reading and arithmetic, what else they might need to learn, if that suits you." "Of course," Clara said, pushing away the melancholy. "I'd be happy to assess their progress. Do you have any books for them? Primers, perhaps, or a reader?" "Some," Luke admitted. "Martha had a few books she used with them, teaching them their letters and such, but it's been—" He paused, his expression darkening briefly. "Well, it's been over a year since anyone's done proper lessons with them. They're bright girls, but they need structure, need someone who knows what they're doing." Clara nodded slowly, considering. How old are you both? She asked the twins. 6, they said in unison. Then Rosie added, but I'm older by 7 minutes. Only because you pushed ahead, Lily said. Mama said I was more polite and waited my turn. Did not. Did too. Mama said, girls. Luke's voice was quiet but firm, and both children fell silent immediately. Something passed across his face, grief, Clara thought, still raw despite the passage of time. The mention of Martha was clearly difficult for him. 6 is a good age to begin formal lessons, Clara said quickly, trying to ease the sudden tension. You're both old enough to sit still for instruction, and young enough that learning will come naturally if we make it interesting. Do you know your letters? Most of them, Rosie said proudly. I can write my name and Lily's name and Papa's name. And I can count to 100, Lily added. Want to hear? Perhaps after supper, Clara suggested gently. But that's very impressive. Both of you are clearly quite intelligent. The girls beamed at the praise, and Clara felt something warm unfold in her chest. They were sweet children beneath their wild energy, hungry for attention and approval. She could work with that. The rest of the meal passed pleasantly. Mrs. Danner's apple tart was every bit as good as the pot roast had been, with a flaky crust and cinnamon-spiced apples that melted on the tongue. The girls ate theirs with sticky-fingered enthusiasm, while Luke told Clara more about the ranch, the cattle operation, the challenges of Wyoming winters, the small community of ranchers and their families scattered across the territory. We're about 15 miles from Cheyenne, he explained, so not completely isolated. There's a church about 8 miles south where folks gather on Sundays. Reverend Michaels holds services there, and afterward, everyone usually stays for a meal and socializing. It's how people stay connected out here. Will you expect me to attend services with the family? Clara asked. Only if you want to, Luke said. I won't force religion on you, Miss Weston. But the girls usually go, and Mrs. Danner, and it might be good for you to meet some of the other women in the area. Well, frontier women can be a bit rough around the edges, but they're good people, kind. Clara nodded, though the thought of facing a church full of strangers, all of whom would likely know about her failed marriage arrangement, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But that was a problem for another day. Tonight, she just needed to survive her first evening in this strange new world. After supper, Mrs. Danner shooed everyone out of the kitchen while she cleaned up, refusing Clara's offer of help. You've had a long day, she said firmly. Tomorrow you can start earning your keep. Tonight, you rest. Luke took the girls upstairs to get ready for bed, and Clara found herself alone in the sitting room, surrounded by the evidence of lives lived and lost. A basket of mending sat beside one chair. Books lined a small shelf, agricultural manuals, a few novels, a well-worn Bible. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a tintype photograph in an ornate frame. Clara moved closer, studying it. A young woman with dark hair and a serious expression stared back at her. She wore a high-collared dress and held an infant in each arm. Beside her stood a younger version of Luke, his face softer, less weathered, but with the same intense blue eyes. Martha. This was Martha McAllister, the ghost that still haunted this house. That was taken just after the girls were born. Luke's voice made Clara jump. She hadn't heard him come back down the stairs. Martha insisted on it, even though she was exhausted. She said she wanted to remember the moment we became a real family. She was very beautiful, Clara said softly. She was. Luke moved to stand beside her, gazing at the photograph with an expression that made Clara's heart ache. She was everything good in this world, patient, kind, always singing. The girls have her smile, her laugh. Sometimes when I hear them playing, I think for just a moment that she's still here, that I'll turn around and see her in the kitchen helping Mrs. Danner or sitting by the fire with her sewing. He paused, his voice growing rougher. But then I remember, and it's like losing her all over again. Clara didn't know what to say to that kind of raw grief. What words could possibly help? So instead, she simply stood beside him in silence, letting him have his moment with the photograph and his memories. Finally, Luke cleared his throat and stepped back. The girls want to say goodnight to you, if you're not too tired. Mo, of course not, Clara said, though in truth she was bone-weary. But something in his voice told her this was important, that the girls asking for her was a sign of acceptance she shouldn't dismiss. She followed him upstairs to a room painted a cheerful yellow, with two narrow beds pushed against opposite walls. Rosie and Lily were already in their nightgowns, their red gold hair brushed out and hanging loose around their shoulders. They looked younger like this, softer, and Clara felt a surge of protective instinct that surprised her with its intensity. "Miss Weston!" Rosie scrambled out of her bed and ran over, throwing her arms around Clara's waist. "You're really staying. I thought maybe you'd change your mind and leave while we were getting ready for bed." "I wouldn't do that," Clara said, touched by the fierce hug. "I promised your father 2 weeks, and I keep my promises." "2 weeks isn't very long," Lily observed from her bed, her expression worried. "What if you like us but still want to leave after 2 weeks?" It was such an astute question, the kind of thing a child who'd already lost one mother would ask. Clara knelt down between the two beds so she could look both girls in the eye. "That's true," she said honestly. 2 weeks isn't very long, but let's not worry about what happens after. Let's just focus on now, on today and tomorrow and the day after that. Can we do that?" Rosie nodded enthusiastically, but Lily still looked uncertain. "Mama left," she said quietly. "She didn't want to, but she still left, and we never got her back." The simple, heartbreaking statement hung in the air. Luke made a sound that might have been a suppressed sob, and Clara's own throat grew tight. "You're right," she said gently. "Your mama left, and that wasn't fair. But Lily, sweetheart, she didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because she was sick, and sometimes when people are very sick, they have to go to heaven whether we want them to or not. That's different from choosing to leave." "But you might choose to leave," Lily persisted, "after 2 weeks." Clara couldn't lie to her. "I might," she admitted. "Or I might choose to stay. Or you and Rosie might decide you don't like having me here and ask your father to send me away. But none of us know what will happen yet. So why don't we just take each day as it comes and try to make the best of it?" Lily considered this, her small face serious. Then finally she nodded. "Okay. But, Miss Weston, will you teach us to read real books? Not just primers, but real stories?" "I'll teach you to read anything you want," Clara promised. "Real books, newspapers, letters, whatever interests you." "Could you read us a story now?" Rosie asked hopefully. "Just a short one? Papa tries, but he's not very good at the voices." "Rosie," Luke said, his voice strained. "Miss Weston's had a very long day. She needs to rest." But Clara found herself smiling. "I think I can manage one story. Do you have a favorite?" The girls conferred in urgent whispers before Lily jumped out of bed and retrieved a battered book from a small shelf. "This one," she said, handing it to Clara. "Mama used to read it to us all the time." It was a collection of fairy tales, the kind Clara remembered from her own childhood. The pages were worn soft from repeated readings, and dried flowers had been pressed between some of them. Markers, perhaps, for Martha's favorite stories. Clara settled into a chair between the beds and opened the book. "Once upon a time," she began, and the familiar words flowed easily, her voice soft but clear in the quiet room. She read the story of a princess who'd been turned into a swan, who flew across distant lands seeking a way to break the curse. The girls listened with rapt attention, their eyes growing heavy as the tale unwound. By the time Clara reached the happy ending, the princess restored to her true form, reunited with her family, both girls were fighting sleep. Their eyelids drooped, and they burrowed deeper into their quilts. "Tomorrow," Rosie murmured, already half asleep. "Read more tomorrow." "I will," Clara promised. She stood quietly and closed the book, setting it on the shelf. Luke moved to each bed, tucking the quilts more tightly around his daughters and pressing kisses to their foreheads. "Good night, my girls," he whispered. "Sweet dreams." Clara followed him out into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind them but leaving it open a crack. "They're wonderful children," she said softly. "They are," Luke agreed. His voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for reading to them. Martha used to—" He stopped, collecting himself. "She used to read to them every night. I've tried to keep up the tradition, but I'm not good at it. My voice is too rough, and I can never remember to do the different characters the way she did." "Practice," Clara said gently. "That's all it takes. Just practice and patience." They stood in the dim hallway for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Finally, Luke spoke again. "Miss Weston, I want you to know, what I said at the station about the girls needing a mother, I didn't mean to imply that I expected you to replace Martha. No one could do that. But they need someone who can guide them, teach them, care for them the way a mother would. Does that make sense?" "It does," Clara said. And it did, though the distinction felt razor thin. How did one mother children without becoming their mother? But she understood what he was trying to say, that he wasn't looking for a wife, wasn't trying to recreate what he'd lost. He just wanted help, wanted his daughters to have what they needed. It should have been reassuring. Instead, Clara felt a strange pang of something that might have been disappointment. She pushed the feeling away. "I should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be a full day." "Of course," Luke gestured down the hall. "Your room's just there, 3 doors down. If you need anything in the night, just knock. Mrs. Danner's room is at the far end. Mine's directly above us on the 3rd floor. The girls know where to find me if they have nightmares." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how strange this all was. Standing in a dark hallway with a man she'd met only hours ago, discussing sleeping arrangements in his house. If anyone from her old life could see her now, they'd be scandalized. But her old life was over. This was her new reality, at least for the next 2 weeks. "Good night, Mr. McAllister," she said. "Luke," he said. "Please, call me Luke. We're not formal here." "Good night, Luke," she amended, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "Good night, Clara." He said her name carefully, as though testing it out. Then he turned and headed for the stairs to the 3rd floor, his footsteps heavy on the wooden treads. Clara made her way to her room, suddenly so exhausted she could barely think straight. Someone, Mrs. Danner probably, had brought her trunk up and left it at the foot of the bed. A lamp burned low on the bedside table, and the quilts had been turned down invitingly. She changed into her nightgown with fumbling fingers, too tired for her usual thorough nighttime routine. She splashed water on her face from the basin, brushed out her hair with quick strokes, and crawled between the sheets. The bed was soft, the quilts warm, and through the window she could see stars scattered across the black Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet. Clara closed her eyes, expecting to fall asleep immediately, but instead her mind raced, replaying the events of the impossible day. The telegram, the platform, Luke and his daughters, this room, this bed, this strange new life. What had she done? What had she agreed to? But beneath the anxiety, that tiny flutter of hope still persisted. The girls had hugged her goodnight. Mrs. Danner had welcomed her in her gruff way. Luke had looked at her with gratitude rather than pity. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. Clara was just beginning to drift off when she heard it, a soft sound from the room next door. Crying. One of the girls was crying. She lay still, listening, wondering if she should do something or if this was normal, something Luke would handle. But the crying continued, muffled but persistent, and after a few minutes Clara couldn't stand it anymore. She climbed out of bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and padded barefoot to the girls' room. She pushed the door open carefully. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, she could see Lily sitting up in bed, her face buried in her hands, her small shoulders shaking. Rosie was still asleep in the other bed, oblivious. "Lily?" Clara whispered, moving into the room. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" The little girl looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I had a bad dream," she choked out. "About Mama. I dreamed she came back, but she didn't know who I was anymore. She looked right at me and didn't see me." Clara's heart broke. She sat on the edge of Lily's bed and pulled the child into her arms. "Oh, honey, that must have been so scary." "I miss her so much," Lily sobbed into Clara's shoulder. "Everyone says it gets better, but it doesn't. It just stays awful all the time." "I know," Clara murmured, stroking the child's hair. "I lost my mama too, when I was not much older than you. And you're right, it doesn't really get better. But it does get different. The hurt doesn't go away, but you learn to live with it. You learn to remember the good things instead of just the sad ones." Lily pulled back slightly, looking up at Clara with red-rimmed eyes. "You lost your mama too?" "I did. And my papa, a few years later." "So you're all alone, like us?" "Like you," Clara agreed softly. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she said, in a very small voice, "I'm glad Papa found you at the train station. I think maybe you needed us as much as we needed you." The simple wisdom of it struck Clara like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went, this 6-year-old child had seen straight through to the heart of things. "I think you might be right," Clara whispered. She stayed with Lily until the child fell back asleep, humming soft tunes she remembered from her own childhood. When she finally crept back to her own room, her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. The next morning arrived with shocking swiftness, announced by a rooster crowing somewhere outside and the sounds of Mrs. Danner banging pots in the kitchen below. Clara woke disoriented, not recognizing the room around her for a confused moment before memory returned. Wyoming. The ranch. Her new position. She dressed quickly in one of her plain day dresses, a serviceable gray wool, and pinned her hair up in a simple style. No need for Boston finery here. When she made her way downstairs, she found the kitchen already bustling with activity. Mrs. Danner stood at the stove, flipping flapjacks with practiced efficiency, while the girls sat at the table with their father, all 3 of them still looking half asleep. "There you are," Mrs. Danner said cheerfully. "Coffee's on the table. Flapjacks will be ready in a moment. Help yourself to butter and molasses." The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but after a few sips, Clara felt her brain beginning to function again. The flapjacks were light and fluffy, and she found herself eating with better appetite than she'd had in weeks. The girls chattered about their plans for the day while Luke read a week-old newspaper, making occasional comments about cattle prices and weather predictions. It was all so normal, so domestic. Clara had dreamed of mornings like this back in Boston, had imagined herself as a wife and mother presiding over breakfast while her family gathered around. The fact that she'd stumbled into this scene by accident rather than design didn't make it any less appealing. After breakfast, Luke took Clara to a small room off the main sitting area that had clearly once been Martha's sewing room. A dress form stood in one corner, half-finished projects still pinned to it. But there was also a small desk with a chair and a bookshelf holding the primers and readers Luke had mentioned. "We can set this up as a schoolroom for the girls," he said, though his eyes lingered on the dress form with visible pain. Mrs. Danner offered to clear out Martha's things, but "I haven't been able to," he trailed off. "We can work around them," Clara said gently. "Or if you'd prefer, I could pack them away carefully. Everything would be saved." Luke shook his head. "Not yet. Maybe soon, but not yet." Clara understood. Grief had its own timeline, and pushing it never helped. "That's fine. Now, shall we see what the girls know?" The morning's lessons revealed that Rosie and Lily were indeed bright children, but their education had large gaps. They could recognize most letters and read simple words, but their writing was atrocious, all uneven letters and backwards B's. Their arithmetic was better, though neither could do multiplication beyond the simplest problems. Geography was a complete mystery to them. They knew they lived in Wyoming territory, but couldn't have pointed to it on a map. "We have a lot of work to do," Clara told Luke, when the girls had been sent outside to play after 2 hours of assessment. "But they're intelligent and eager to learn. That's half the battle." "Will you need supplies?" Luke asked. "Books, paper, pencils?" "Some," Clara admitted. "Better readers, definitely. A globe would be helpful, and perhaps some maps. Slate boards for practicing writing. They're less expensive than paper and can be reused." "Make a list," Luke said. "I'll ride into Cheyenne next week and get whatever you need." He paused, then added, "I'm grateful for this, Clara. More than I can say. The girls, they're already brighter than they were yesterday. You saw how Lily smiled during the reading lesson? I haven't seen her that engaged in months." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "They're wonderful children, Luke. It's a pleasure to teach them." And it was true. Despite her exhaustion, despite the strangeness of her situation, Clara found herself genuinely enjoying the morning's lessons. The girls were attentive and curious, asking endless questions about everything from why letters made different sounds to whether the world was really round, or if that was just something grown-ups said to confuse children. The days began to develop a rhythm. Clara woke at dawn, helped Mrs. Danner with breakfast, then spent the morning in lessons with the girls. After the midday meal, the children had free time to play while Clara helped with household tasks, mending clothes, preparing vegetables, occasionally helping with the endless laundry. Late afternoons were devoted to lighter lessons, reading aloud, practicing penmanship, or teaching the girls simple embroidery stitches. Evenings were for supper and family time, with Clara reading to the girls before bed. Luke was often occupied with ranch work, mending fences, checking on cattle, managing his 3 ranch hands. But he joined them for meals and sometimes in the evenings. Clara found herself learning about ranching almost by osmosis, listening to Luke discuss the challenges of keeping cattle healthy through the coming winter, the need to cut and store enough hay, the delicate balance of managing grazing land. Mrs. Danner proved to be a wealth of information about the local area, sharing gossip about neighboring ranchers and their families while she and Clara worked side by side in the kitchen. Clara learned that the widow Jensen was sweet on the blacksmith in town, that the Roberts family had just had their 5th child, that Reverend Michaels was considered a fine preacher but couldn't carry a tune to save his life. It was all so different from Boston, where Clara had known her neighbors only by sight and sound through thin apartment walls. Here, despite the vast distances between homesteads, people seemed connected in ways she'd never experienced. 3 days into her stay, Clara was helping Mrs. Danner make bread when the older woman said abruptly, "You're good for them, you know. The girls. They're coming back to themselves." Clara looked up from kneading dough, surprised. "I'm just teaching them their lessons." "You're doing more than that," Mrs. Danner said firmly. "You're giving them attention, affection, making them feel like they matter. That's what they've been missing." She paused, then added more quietly, "Luke, too. He's been half dead since Martha passed, but I've heard him laughing these past few days. Actually laughing, not just going through the motions." The observation made Clara uncomfortable. She didn't want to think about Luke laughing because of her, didn't want to examine why that knowledge made her pulse quicken. She was here as a governess, nothing more. Getting attached to the girls, to this place, to Luke, would be a mistake. 2 weeks, she'd promised. 2 weeks to catch her breath and make a plan. But the 2 weeks were slipping by faster than she'd anticipated, and Clara found she hadn't given any real thought to what came next. Where would she go? What would she do? The questions lurked at the edges of her mind, but she kept pushing them away, focusing instead on irregular verbs and proper table manners and the proper way to darn a sock. On Sunday morning, Luke announced they would all be attending services at the community church. Clara's stomach clenched with anxiety. This would be her first time facing the wider community, the people who would have heard about the abandoned bride at the station. But she dressed carefully in her best day dress, pinned her hair into a proper style, and climbed into the wagon with the family. The church was a simple wooden structure, barely more than a large room with benches and a modest pulpit, but it was packed with people, ranch families from all over the area, scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday best. Clara felt dozens of eyes turn toward her as they entered, heard the whispers rustle through the congregation like wind through grass. "That's her, the mail-order bride. Poor thing. Heard Patterson dumped her before she even got off the train. Luke McAllister brought her home? How scandalous!" Clara kept her chin up and her eyes forward, refusing to show how the whispers stung. She sat between the girls on a wooden bench, hyper-aware of every glance, every murmur. But when Rosie reached over and took her hand, squeezing it comfortingly, Clara felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. Reverend Michaels was a thin man with kind eyes who preached about grace and second chances. Clara tried to focus on his words, but she kept feeling the weight of judgment from the people around her. When the service finally ended, she wanted nothing more than to escape to the wagon and leave. But Mrs. Danner had other plans. She grabbed Clara's arm and marched her over to a cluster of women setting out food for the community meal. "Ladies, I want you to meet Miss Clara Weston. She's been teaching the McAllister girls this past week, and doing a fine job of it, too." The women looked Clara over with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Finally, one of them, a stout woman with graying hair, spoke up. "Heard you came here to marry Jim Patterson." "I did," Clara said evenly, "but circumstances changed." "Jim's a fool," another woman said bluntly. "You're better off without him. Man can't make up his mind about anything. Went through 3 potential brides before you, you know, each time getting cold feet at the last minute." Clara hadn't known that. The information was somehow both humiliating and oddly comforting. At least Patterson's rejection wasn't personal. "Well, His loss is Luke McAllister's gain, the first woman said. Those poor girls have needed a woman's influence since Martha passed. God rest her soul. The mention of Martha caused a moment of respectful silence. Then the women began peppering Clara with questions about Boston, about her teaching methods, about whether she planned to stay at Wind Creek Ranch permanently. Clara answered as best she could, gradually relaxing as she realized these women weren't judging her. They were simply curious and perhaps a bit protective of Luke and his daughters. By the time the meal was served, Clara found herself genuinely enjoying the company. The women were blunt and sometimes crude in their speech, but they were also warm and welcoming in ways Boston society never had been. They shared advice about teaching children, about managing household tasks, about surviving Wyoming winters. They included her in their gossip and their laughter, treating her not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. When it was time to leave, several of the women hugged Clara goodbye and made her promise to return the following Sunday. As the McAllister wagon rolled away from the church, Clara felt lighter than she had since arriving in Cheyenne. She'd survived her first public appearance. More than survived. She'd found acceptance. "You did well," Luke said quietly as they drove. The girls had fallen asleep in the back, worn out from playing with other children. "I know that wasn't easy." "It wasn't so bad," Clara said. "The women were kind." "They're good people," Luke agreed. "Frontier life makes you practical. There's no room for pretension or judgment out here. You do your work, you help your neighbors, and you earn respect through your actions." Clara considered this. It's different from Boston. There, everything was about appearances and social standing, who your family was, where you lived, what you wore to church. None of that seems to matter here. "It doesn't," Luke said. "Here, what matters is whether you can survive a hard winter, whether your word is good, whether you'll show up when your neighbor needs help mending a barn. Everything else is just noise." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on Clara's face. She watched the landscape roll past, golden grass, distant mountains, endless sky, and felt something settle in her chest, something that felt dangerously like contentment. "Luke," she said suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. "What happens after 2 weeks? Have you thought about that?" His hands tightened slightly on the reins, but his voice remained steady. "I've thought about little else. Have you?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know what to do. I don't have money to go anywhere else. And even if I did—" She trailed off. "Even if you did?" Luke prompted. "I don't want to," Clara admitted in a whisper. "I don't want to leave. The girls, Mrs. Danner, this place, I've been happier this week than I've been in years. But I don't know if staying is the right thing. I don't know what people will think, or what it means, or—" "Clara." Luke's voice was gentle but firm. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her fully. "I want you to stay, not just for 2 weeks, permanently. As the girls' governess, yes, but also as—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "As part of this family. We need you." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Clara wasn't sure she understood. Her heart pounded against her ribs, and she realized her hands were shaking. "Luke, I can't be Martha," she said. "I can't replace what you lost." "I'm not asking you to," he said quickly. "I could never ask that. Martha was my wife, the mother of my children, and no one will ever take her place in my heart." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "But Clara, the heart's a strange thing. It has room for more than one kind of love, room for grief and gratitude to exist side by side. I loved Martha. I'll always love Martha. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for you too, in a different way." Clara's breath caught. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Before she could ask, a voice called out from behind them. "Papa, why'd we stop? Are we home yet?" The moment shattered. Luke turned back to the reins and the wagon lurched forward again. But as they drove the rest of the way to the ranch, Clara's mind raced with possibilities she'd been afraid to consider. What if she stayed? What if this strange arrangement became permanent? What if 2 weeks stretched into forever? The questions followed her through the rest of the day, through supper and evening chores and reading the girls their bedtime story. That night, lying in her bed and staring at the ceiling, Clara made a decision. She would stay. For as long as they'd have her, she would stay. And if that made her a fool, so be it. She'd rather be a fool with a home and a family than a wise woman with nothing at all. The decision to stay should have brought Clara peace, but instead it kept her awake most of the night, her mind spinning through a dozen different scenarios. What would staying mean, exactly? Would she remain simply as a governess, living on the edges of this family, but never truly part of it? Or was Luke suggesting something more, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure? She rose before dawn, exhausted but restless, and found Mrs. Danner already in the kitchen, rolling out pie dough with practiced efficiency. "Couldn't sleep?" the older woman asked, not looking up from her work. "Too much on my mind," Clara admitted, moving to help with breakfast preparations. She began slicing bacon, the familiar task giving her hands something to do while her thoughts continued their chaotic dance. Mrs. Danner worked in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "He asked you to stay, didn't he?" Clara's knife stilled. "How did you—" "I've known Luke McAllister since he was 22 years old and brought his new bride home to this ranch," Mrs. Danner said. "I've watched him grieve for 2 years, watched him try to be both mother and father to those girls, and fail at half of it through no fault of his own. And I've watched him this past week come back to life." She finally looked up, her brown eyes sharp and knowing. "He needs you, Miss Weston. Those girls need you. Question is, what do you need?" It was such a direct question, so unlike the careful dancing around topics that had characterized every conversation Clara had ever had in Boston. She found herself answering with equal honesty. "I need to belong somewhere," she said softly. "I need to matter to someone. I need to not feel like I'm always in the way, always one mistake away from being cast out." She paused, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "I need a home." Mrs. Danner nodded slowly, as though Clara had confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Then you have your answer. This can be your home, if you want it. But Clara—" She used Clara's first name for the first time, and the intimacy of it made Clara's eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You need to be clear about what you're agreeing to. Luke's a good man, but he's still half in love with a ghost. The girls adore you already, but they're also fiercely loyal to their mother's memory. This won't be easy. There'll be hard days, days when you wonder if you made the right choice." "I know," Clara said. "But Mrs. Danner, the alternative is going back to Boston and living on my cousin's charity, or finding some other position where I'm just hired help with no real connection to anyone. At least here, I can try. At least here, there's a chance of something more." The housekeeper studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. "Then welcome home, Clara Weston. Now finish that bacon before the girls wake up and start demanding breakfast while it's only half cooked." The words, "welcome home," echoed in Clara's mind all through breakfast, all through the morning lessons with Rosie and Lily. She hadn't told Luke her decision yet, hadn't found the right moment, but it sat in her chest like a warm stone, steadying her. The girls were working on their penmanship, laboriously copying out a verse from the Bible, their tongues sticking out slightly with concentration, when Clara heard horses outside. Moments later, voices drifted through the window. Luke's deep tones, and another man's voice she didn't recognize, younger and more animated. "Papa's back!" Rosie dropped her slate and ran to the window. "And he brought someone. Lily, look, it's Mr. Harrison." Both girls abandoned their lessons to press their faces against the glass. Clara moved to join them, curious about who would visit in the middle of a weekday. Through the window, she saw Luke helping a younger man down from his horse. The visitor was perhaps 25, tall and lean, with sandy hair and an easy smile. He wore town clothes, a proper suit and hat, and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to attention. "Who's Mr. Harrison?" Clara asked. "He's the teacher in Cheyenne," Lily explained. "He runs the schoolhouse there. He's really nice, and he tells funny jokes." Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. A teacher from town, visiting unexpectedly. This couldn't be a coincidence. Luke and the young man were walking toward the house now, their conversation too quiet to hear through the closed window. Clara turned away, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Girls, back to your lessons. We still have 10 more minutes before dinner time." But she couldn't concentrate on their work. Her ears strained toward the front door, hearing it open, hearing boots on the wooden floor, hearing Luke's voice calling out, Mrs. Danner, is Clara with the girls? In the schoolroom, Mrs. Danner called back. Footsteps approached, and then Luke appeared in the doorway with the stranger beside him. Up close, Clara could see that Mr. Harrison was handsome in a boyish way, with green eyes and a spattering of freckles across his nose. He smiled when he saw her, a bright, charming smile that probably worked well on most women. Miss Weston, this is David Harrison, Luke said. His expression was carefully neutral, but Clara could see tension in the set of his shoulders. He teaches at the school in Cheyenne. David, this is Miss Clara Weston, the girl's governess. A pleasure to meet you, Miss Weston. David Harrison stepped forward, hand extended. His grip was warm and firm when Clara shook it. Luke's told me about you. It's wonderful that the girls have a proper teacher now. Thank you, Clara said carefully, unsure where this was going. What brings you out to Wind Creek Ranch, Mr. Harrison? Actually, you do. David's smile widened. You see, I've been running the Cheyenne school for 2 years now, but the town's been growing, and we've reached a point where I need help. I've been advertising for an assistant teacher for months with no success. When Luke mentioned you at church on Sunday, mentioned that you're educated, experienced with children, good at instruction, well, I had to come meet you myself. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Are you offering me a position? If you're interested, David said enthusiastically. It would be a proper teaching job, Miss Weston. 20 students of varying ages, a real schoolhouse, a salary of $40 a month plus room and board with a respectable family in town. You'd be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, all the subjects. It's challenging work, but rewarding. $40 a month. That was nearly twice what Luke was paying her, and she'd be in town, part of a real community, doing work that would be respected. It was everything she should want. Security, independence, a proper position. So why did the offer feel like a trap? I'm very flattered, Mr. Harrison, Clara said slowly, but I'm already committed here. The girls need consistency in their education, and I've only been working with them for a week. It would be irresponsible to abandon them now. Oh, I'm not suggesting you leave immediately, David assured her. The position wouldn't start until after Christmas. That's still 6 weeks away. Plenty of time to finish out your commitment to the McAllisters and make arrangements. He glanced at Luke. I hope I'm not overstepping, but Luke, surely you can see this would be better for Miss Weston. A proper career rather than just a temporary governess position? Luke's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. That's for Clara to decide. I won't presume to tell her what's best for her future. The tension between the two men was palpable. Clara looked from one to the other, understanding suddenly that this visit wasn't just about a teaching position. It was a test. Luke had brought David here, had told him about Clara, perhaps to give her options, to make sure she was staying because she wanted to, not because she had no other choice. Or maybe he was hoping she'd take the job and leave. Maybe their conversation yesterday in the wagon had been his way of easing his conscience before sending her away. The thought made Clara's chest tight with panic. She opened her mouth to refuse the offer outright. The school, see the facilities, meet some of the students' families. Then you can make an informed decision. He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. That's where you can find me, please. At least think about it. Clara took the card numbly. Yes, I'll think about it. Thank you for the offer, Mr. Harrison. Please call me David. That charming smile again. I have a feeling we're going to be friends, Miss Weston. Or may I call you Clara? Miss Weston is fine for now, Clara said, her voice firmer than she felt. David took the hint gracefully. After a few more minutes of polite conversation, during which the girls peppered him with questions about the schoolhouse and the other children in town, he made his excuses and left. Luke walked him out to his horse, and through the window Clara watched them talk in low voices, David gesturing animatedly while Luke stood with his arms crossed. Are you going to be a real teacher? Rosie asked, tugging on Clara's skirt. In town? I don't know, sweetheart, Clara said honestly. It's something to think about. But you can't leave, Lily said, her voice rising with distress. You just got here. You said you'd stay for 2 weeks, and it's only been 1 week. You promised. Lily, I'm not leaving right now, Clara assured her, kneeling down to the child's level. And if I did consider the position, it wouldn't start until after Christmas. That's a long time away. But you're thinking about it, Lily accused, her eyes filling with tears. You're thinking about leaving us just like... She stopped, but Clara knew what she'd been about to say, just like Mama. Lily, honey, that's not fair. But the little girl had already run from the room, her footsteps pounding up the stairs. Rosie looked between Clara and the doorway uncertainly. She's scared, Rosie said quietly, with a wisdom beyond her years. She really likes you, we both do, and we don't want you to go. The simple honesty of it broke something open in Clara's chest. I really like you too, she said softly. Both of you. Then stay, Rosie said, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. Don't go be a teacher in town. Be our teacher. Be our... She paused, then finished in a whisper. Be our mama. Clara pulled the child into a fierce hug, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Over Rosie's shoulder, she saw Luke standing in the doorway, having come back inside without her noticing. His expression was unreadable, but his blue eyes were intense, watching her with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Go find your sister, Clara told Rosie gently. Tell her I'm not going anywhere without talking to both of you first. That's a promise. Rosie nodded and scampered off. Clara stood slowly, suddenly aware that she and Luke were alone in the small schoolroom, the air between them charged with unspoken words. I didn't invite him here to try to get rid of you, Luke said before Clara could speak. I want you to know that. Then why did you tell him about me? Clara asked. Why give him the idea to offer me a position? Luke moved into the room, his large frame somehow making the space feel even smaller. Because you deserve to have choices, Clara. You came here with nothing, running from a situation that wasn't your fault. I don't want you to stay just because you think you have no other options. If you're going to be here, I need to know it's because you want to be, not because you're trapped. It was such a profoundly decent thing to say that Clara felt tears prick her eyes. And what if I want both? She asked quietly. What if I want the security of knowing I have options, but I also want to stay here? What if I've already made my choice? Luke's breath caught audibly. Have you? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Then, forcing the words out, she said, I want to stay, Luke. Not just for 2 weeks. Not just as a governess. I want to be part of this family, if you'll have me. The girls, Mrs. Danner, this ranch, it already feels more like home than Boston ever did. Clara. Her name was barely a whisper on his lips. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching at his sides as though he wanted to reach for her but didn't dare. You need to understand what you're agreeing to. This life. It's hard. The winters are brutal, the work is endless, and the isolation can drive people mad. And the girls, they'll test you. They'll compare you to Martha, consciously or not. There'll be days when you wonder what the hell you were thinking. I know, Clara said. Mrs. Danner already warned me. But Luke, I've spent my whole life trying to fit into places where I didn't belong, trying to make myself smaller and quieter so I wouldn't be in the way. I don't want to do that anymore. Here, with you and the girls, I don't feel like I'm in the way. I feel like I matter. You do matter, Luke said roughly. More than you know. These past 2 weeks, he broke off, shaking his head. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Didn't think I wanted to. After Martha died, I told myself that was it. That I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it. That the best I could do was survive and make sure the girls were taken care of. But then you stepped off that train, and a door slammed upstairs, followed by the thunder of small feet running. Both girls burst into the schoolroom, Lily's face streaked with tears, but hopeful now. Rosie said you're staying, Lily announced breathlessly. Is it true? Are you really staying? Clara looked at Luke, a question in her eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly, and something passed between them, an understanding, an acknowledgement that they were stepping forward into unknown territory together. Yes, Clara said, opening her arms as both girls crashed into her. I'm staying, for as long as you'll have me. The celebration that followed was chaotic and joyful. The girls danced around the schoolroom, chattering excitedly about all the things they'd do now that Miss Weston wasn't leaving. Mrs. Danner appeared in the doorway, took one look at the scene, and smiled knowingly before announcing that dinner was ready and they'd all better wash up. During the meal, the girls peppered Clara with questions about what her staying meant. Would she get her own horse? Could they show her the creek where they caught tadpoles in summer? Would she come with them to pick wild berries when the season started again? Clara answered each question patiently, feeling more settled with each passing moment. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. After dinner, Luke asked Clara to walk with him. They left the girls helping Mrs. Danner with dishes, or more accurately, helping in the way that 6-year-olds do, which mostly meant getting in the way and making the task take twice as long. Luke led Clara outside, and they walked in comfortable silence toward the horse paddock. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and the air smelled of hay and pine and the particular clean scent of the high country. Clara breathed deeply, feeling tension she didn't know she'd been carrying start to release from her shoulders. "There's something we need to discuss," Luke said finally, stopping by the fence and resting his arms on the top rail. "About the nature of your position here." Clara's stomach fluttered nervously. "All right. You said you want to be part of this family, and I meant what I said. We want you here. But Clara, I need to be honest with you about what I'm able to offer." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I can't promise you romance. I can't promise that I'll fall in love with you the way I loved Martha. That kind of lightning doesn't strike twice for most people." The words should have hurt, but Clara had known they were coming. She'd seen the way Luke looked at Martha's photograph, heard the pain in his voice when he spoke of her. She nodded for him to continue. "But," Luke said, and his voice softened, "I can promise you respect, partnership, a real home, not just a position. And in time, if we both find our way there." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There are different kinds of love, Clara. The passionate, all-consuming kind I had with Martha, yes. But there's also the steady kind, built on mutual respect and shared purpose and genuine affection. That kind of love might not burn as bright, but it burns longer. It's the kind that survives hard winters and difficult times." Clara considered his words, turning them over in her mind. He was offering her honesty, at least. No false promises of romance or declarations he couldn't back up. Just the truth of what he could and couldn't give. "I can live with that," she said finally. "Luke, I'm not asking you to forget Martha or to love me the way you loved her. I'm just asking for a place to belong, for a chance to build something real, even if it looks different from what either of us imagined." Relief flooded Luke's face. "Then we understand each other." "We do." Clara paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "But what exactly are you proposing? Am I to remain the governess indefinitely, or are you suggesting something else?" Luke's ears turned red, visible even in the fading light. "I suppose I should have been clear about that. Clara, I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me, not right away," he added quickly, seeing her eyes widen. "We barely know each other, and you deserve time to be sure. But eventually, when you're ready, I'd like to make this official. Give you the protection of my name, make you the girl's legal mother. It's the practical thing to do, and it's what people will expect if you're living here permanently. Marriage." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. It was what Clara had come west for in the first place, what she'd expected from James Patterson. But this was different. This was a man she'd met less than 2 weeks ago, asking her to bind her life to his, not out of passion or romance, but out of practical necessity and genuine affection. It should have felt cold, clinical. Instead, it felt right. "I'll need time," Clara said slowly. "Time to be sure this is what I want. Time for the girls to adjust to having me here. Time for both of us to know we're making the right choice." "Of course," Luke agreed. "Take all the time you need. There's no rush. For now, you can stay on as governess, and we'll see how things develop." He held out his hand. "Partners?" Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of ranch work, the strength in his grip. "Partners," she agreed. They shook on it solemnly, and then Luke surprised her by pulling her into a brief, careful hug. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond helping her in and out of the wagon, and Clara was startled by how right it felt, his solid warmth, the smell of leather and horses and soap that clung to him. When he released her, they were both slightly flustered. "We should head back," Luke said. "Mrs. Danner will be wondering where we've gotten to." As they walked back to the house side by side, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: genuine contentment. She'd found a place to belong, people who wanted her, a future that held promise even if it wasn't the fairy tale she'd once imagined. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next few weeks passed in a blur of autumn activity. The lessons with the girls progressed beautifully. Both children were reading simple stories now, their handwriting improving daily. Clara established routines and expectations, finding that the girls thrived with structure. They still had their wild moments, still occasionally tested boundaries, but they were also eager to please and hungry for praise. Mrs. Danner taught Clara the rhythms of ranch life: how to preserve vegetables for winter, how to render fat for soap, how to manage the endless cycle of cooking and cleaning and mending that kept a household running. Clara's hands, once soft from Boston life, developed calluses. Her back grew stronger from hauling water and beating rugs. She learned to read the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of the animals. Luke was often occupied with ranch work, but he made time each evening to sit with them, asking about the girls' lessons and Clara's day. Sometimes he read the newspaper aloud, sharing news from the wider world. Other times he taught them card games or told stories about his own childhood in Missouri. Clara found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings. The four of them gathered around the fireplace while winter crept closer outside. The promised visit to David Harrison's school came and went. Clara rode into Cheyenne with Luke, toured the schoolhouse, and met some of the students. It was a fine facility, and David was clearly a dedicated teacher. But as Clara watched him interact with his students, as she imagined herself in that role, she felt nothing but relief that she'd already made her choice. This might have been a good life, but it wasn't her life. Her place was at Wind Creek Ranch. She declined David's offer politely but firmly. He took it well, though there was disappointment in his eyes. "If you change your mind," he said, "the position will likely still be available in spring. Teachers are hard to come by out here." But Clara knew she wouldn't change her mind. November arrived with the first serious snow, a storm that dumped 8 inches overnight and turned the world white and silent. Clara woke to the girls' excited squeals and found them pressed against the window, watching fat flakes drift down from a leaden sky. "Can we go play in it?" Rosie begged. "Please, Miss Weston. We haven't had good snow in forever." Clara had planned a full day of lessons, but looking at their eager faces, she found herself relenting. "After breakfast," she said, "and only if you dress warmly and promise not to track snow through the house." The morning that followed was pure magic. The girls showed Clara how to make snow angels, how to build a proper snowman, how to pack snowballs just right for maximum impact. Luke emerged from the barn to find all 3 of them engaged in a spirited snowball fight, Clara laughing as she dodged the girls' attacks and launched her own careful throws. "Need backup?" Luke called, grinning. "Papa, no!" Lily shrieked. "You'll make it unfair!" But Luke was already scooping up snow, and within moments the battle had escalated. Clara found herself allied with the girls against Luke, the 3 of them ganging up on him with ruthless efficiency. He retaliated by scooping Rosie up and threatening to dump her in a snowbank, which resulted in shrieks of delighted protest. Finally, breathless and cold, they all tumbled back inside. Mrs. Danner took one look at them, red-cheeked, snow-covered, and grinning, and shooed them toward the fire. "Get those wet things off before you catch your deaths," she scolded, but there was warmth in her voice. "I'll make hot cocoa." As Clara helped the girls out of their wet coats and boots, as Luke stoked the fire and Mrs. Danner bustled in with steaming mugs, Clara had a sudden flash of clarity. This was family. Not the family she'd imagined back in Boston, not the neat, proper life she'd thought she wanted, but real, messy, joyful family nonetheless. That night, after the girls were asleep, Clara sat with Luke in the study while he went over ranch accounts. She was mending one of his shirts, the domesticity of the scene not lost on her. "Luke," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about your proposal." His pen stilled on the paper. He looked up at her, his expression carefully neutral. "And?" "I'd like to say yes," Clara said. "Not immediately. I still think we should wait a bit longer, give everyone time to adjust. But I want you to know that I'm certain. This is where I want to be. This is the life I want." Luke set down his pen slowly, his blue eyes searching her face. "You're sure? Because, Clara, If you have any doubts—" "I don't," she interrupted. "I know this isn't a traditional courtship. I know we're not in love the way people in romance novels are. But Luke, I care for you. I care for the girls. I care for this place and this life. And I think, given time, we can build something real together, something lasting." He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye level. "I care for you too," he said softly. "More than I thought I would when I asked you to come home with me that day at the station. You've brought light back to this house, Clara. You've given my daughters hope and joy. You've given me—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "You've given me a reason to think about the future again, instead of just surviving the present." Clara reached out and touched his cheek, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palm. "Then let's build that future together." Luke turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender that Clara's breath caught. Then he stood and offered her his hand. "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." Curious, Clara followed him upstairs to the 3rd floor, to his private room. She'd never been up here before, had assumed it was off limits. But Luke led her inside without hesitation, lighting a lamp to chase away the shadows. The room was spartanly furnished: a large bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, a single chair by the window. But what caught Clara's attention was the chest at the foot of the bed. Luke knelt beside it and opened it carefully, pulling out a small wooden box. "This was Martha's," he said, opening the box to reveal jewelry nestled in velvet. Simple pieces, nothing extravagant, but clearly treasured. He lifted out a gold ring with a small pearl. "Her wedding ring. I've been keeping it safe, thinking maybe one day the girls might want it." He held it out to Clara. "But I think Martha would want you to have it. Would want you to wear it when we make this official." Clara stared at the ring, emotions warring in her chest. It felt wrong somehow to wear Martha's ring, to step into her place so completely. And yet it also felt right, like a blessing from the woman who'd loved this family first, a passing of the torch. "I can't," she whispered. "Luke, it's too much. It's hers." "She's gone," Luke said gently but firmly, "and she'd hate to think of you feeling like you couldn't fully be part of this family because you were afraid of taking her place. Clara, there's room for both of you in this house. Room for her memory and your presence. They don't have to be at odds." Clara took the ring with trembling fingers, holding it up to the lamplight. It was beautiful in its simplicity, worn smooth from years of wear. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Luke closed her fingers around the ring. "Keep it safe. When you're ready, when we're both ready, you can wear it. But I wanted you to have it now, to know that I'm committed to this. To us." Overcome with emotion, Clara threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Luke's arms came around her, holding her close, and for a long moment they simply stood there, taking comfort in each other's presence. When they finally pulled apart, both were slightly embarrassed by the display of emotion. But as they headed back downstairs, Clara slipped the ring into her pocket, feeling its small weight like a promise. The next Sunday at church, Clara noticed people looking at her differently. Word had spread, as it always did in small communities, that she'd declined the teaching position in town and was staying at Wind Creek Ranch permanently. The women who'd befriended her before now welcomed her with even more warmth, including her in conversations about winter preparations and holiday plans, as though she'd always been part of their circle. After the service, as families gathered for the community meal, one of the older women, Mrs. Peterson, who ran the general store in town, pulled Clara aside. "I'm glad you're staying," she said bluntly. "Luke McAllister's a good man, and those girls need a mother. Martha was my goddaughter, you know. I loved her dearly. And I'm telling you, she'd approve of you." The unexpected endorsement made Clara's eyes sting with tears. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Mrs. Peterson patted her arm. "You've got a kind heart and a practical head on your shoulders. That's what it takes to survive out here. Welcome to Wyoming territory, Miss Weston. I expect we'll be calling you Mrs. McAllister before too long." The casual prediction should have flustered Clara, but instead she found herself smiling. "Perhaps you will." As winter settled in earnest over Wind Creek Ranch, Clara discovered the truth of Luke's warnings about the isolation and difficulty of frontier life. The days grew short and brutally cold. Snow piled in drifts around the buildings, and the wind howled through the cracks in the walls like a living thing. Ranch work became a matter of survival, keeping the cattle alive, maintaining the buildings, ensuring everyone had enough food and warmth to last until spring. But Clara also discovered the beauty in it, the way the snow sparkled under moonlight like scattered diamonds, the coziness of evenings spent around the fire, the four of them warm and safe while the storm raged outside. The satisfaction of preserving food, of mending clothes, of teaching the girls new skills that would serve them their whole lives. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she discovered something else. She was falling in love. Not the passionate, overwhelming love of romance novels, but something quieter, deeper. The love that came from watching Luke's patience with his daughters, from seeing how he cared for every animal on the ranch as though each were precious, from the way he always made sure Clara had enough blankets at night and hot coffee in the morning. The love that grew from shared work and shared laughter, from knowing someone's rhythms and habits, from building a life together one ordinary day at a time. And she hoped, that maybe Luke was feeling the same way. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression soft and wondering. He found small excuses to touch her hand, to stand close, to seek her out during the day. And once, when she'd been particularly frustrated trying to teach Lily the concept of fractions, he'd placed his hands on her shoulders and said quietly, "You're doing beautifully. Don't doubt yourself." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something. As December arrived and Christmas approached, the girls' excitement became almost unbearable. They asked constantly what Clara thought they might receive, what treats Mrs. Danner might bake, whether it would snow on Christmas Day. Clara found herself caught up in their enthusiasm, helping them make simple gifts for their father and Mrs. Danner, handkerchief sachets filled with dried lavender, a bookmark decorated with pressed flowers. One evening, Luke asked Clara to help him in the barn. When they arrived, he led her to a back stall where a beautiful chestnut mare stood peacefully munching hay. "Her name's Cinnamon," Luke said. "She's gentle, well-trained, perfect for a beginner rider. I thought—" He cleared his throat, suddenly looking nervous. "I thought you might like to learn to ride, and if you do, she could be yours. A Christmas gift." Clara stared at the horse, then at Luke, overwhelmed. "Luke, I can't accept something like this. A horse is far too valuable. You're part of this family," Luke said firmly, "and everyone in this family needs to know how to ride. It's practical, Clara. If something happens and you need to get to town, or if there's an emergency, you need to be able to handle a horse. Besides," he added, his voice softening, "I want you to be able to ride out with us in spring, see the ranch properly. And Cinnamon deserves someone who'll love her. She was Martha's horse." The last sentence hung in the air between them. This was another torch being passed, another way Luke was making space for Clara in his life and his family. Clara approached the mare slowly, holding out her hand. Cinnamon waffled softly, her breath warm against Clara's palm. "Hello, beautiful girl," Clara murmured. "Are you going to teach me how to ride?" The horse's brown eyes were liquid and kind, and when Clara stroked her nose, Cinnamon leaned into the touch. A lump formed in Clara's throat. "Thank you," she said to Luke. "I'll take good care of her." "I know you will." Luke moved to stand beside her, both of them petting the mare. "We'll start lessons after Christmas, when the weather clears a bit. By spring, you'll be riding like you were born to it." As they walked back to the house through the crisp December night, stars brilliant overhead, Clara felt Martha's ring in her pocket where she'd taken to carrying it. Soon, she thought. Soon she'd be ready to wear it. Soon they'd make this arrangement official, bind their lives together permanently. The thought no longer scared her. Instead, it filled her with quiet joy. She was home. Finally, truly home. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. The world outside transformed into a crystalline wonderland. Clara woke to the sound of the girls whispering excitedly in the hallway, clearly trying and failing to be quiet. She smiled into her pillow, then rose quickly and dressed, knowing that Rosie and Lily wouldn't wait much longer before bursting into everyone's rooms demanding they come downstairs. When Clara emerged from her room, she found both girls practically vibrating with anticipation outside Luke's door on the third floor. They'd clearly been waiting for her before waking their father. "Can we wake him now?" Lily stage whispered. "Please. We've been waiting forever." It's Christmas, Rosie added, as though this explained everything. Clara glanced at the window at the end of the hall, noting the pale light. It's barely dawn. Your father's been working hard all week preparing for the holiday. Don't you think we should let him sleep a bit longer? Both girls' faces fell so dramatically that Clara had to suppress a laugh. Before she could say anything else, Luke's door opened and he appeared, hair tousled and still in his nightshirt, looking remarkably alert for someone who'd supposedly been asleep. I heard someone mention Christmas, he said solemnly, his eyes twinkling. Was I dreaming, or is it actually here? The girls shrieked and launched themselves at him, and Luke caught them easily, swinging them around until they were dizzy with laughter. Over their heads, his eyes met Clara's, and the warmth in his gaze made her breath catch. Merry Christmas, Clara, he said softly. Merry Christmas, Luke. The moment stretched between them, heavy with something unspoken, until Rosie tugged impatiently on her father's sleeve. Papa, come on! We have to see if St. Nicholas came. Downstairs, Mrs. Danner was already in the kitchen, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee filled the house. The older woman had outdone herself. The table was laden with special treats she'd been preparing for days. But the girls barely glanced at the food, their attention fixed on the sitting room where a small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper stars the girls had made. Beneath the tree sat a modest collection of wrapped packages. Clara had worried her gifts would be too simple. The handkerchief sachets from the girls, a knitted scarf she'd made for Luke, a new apron for Mrs. Danner. But seeing the girls' faces light up at the sight of any presents at all, she realized that out here, it wasn't the value of the gift that mattered, but the thought behind it. Luke insisted they eat breakfast first, despite the girls' protests. Christmas will still be here in half an hour, he said firmly. And Mrs. Danner worked too hard on this meal for us to ignore it. The breakfast was indeed spectacular. Cinnamon rolls dripping with icing, scrambled eggs with cheese, thick slices of ham, and biscuits with honey butter. Clara ate more than she probably should have, caught up in the festive mood. Even Mrs. Danner sat down to eat with them, something she rarely did, and the five of them lingered over coffee and conversation while the winter sun climbed higher outside. Finally, when the girls were practically bouncing in their seats, Luke relented and they moved to the sitting room. The gift opening was a joyful chaos. The girls received new dresses from Mrs. Danner, books from their father, and a beautiful set of watercolor paints from Clara that made them gasp with delight. Luke opened his gifts with genuine pleasure. The scarf Clara had knitted, a new pipe from Mrs. Danner, and drawings from each of the girls showing him on horseback looking ridiculously heroic. Mrs. Danner received her apron from Clara, a warm shawl from Luke, and more drawings from the girls. She dabbed at her eyes when she opened them, claiming it was just the fireplace smoke making them water. Clara's own gifts were modest but thoughtful. Mrs. Danner had made her a beautiful quilt in shades of blue and cream. The girls gave her the sachets they'd worked so hard on, along with a painting they'd made together showing the four of them standing in front of the ranch house. And Luke handed her a wrapped package with an expression she couldn't quite read. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a set of fine writing pens. For recording the girls' lessons, Luke explained. And maybe for writing down your own thoughts, too. I know you had to leave most of your belongings behind in Boston. Thought you might like something that's just yours. The thoughtfulness of it made Clara's throat tight. Thank you, she managed. It's perfect. But Luke wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Girls, why don't you take Mrs. Danner to the kitchen and help her start on those cookies she promised you could make today? The girls groaned at being sent away but obeyed, sensing this was important. Mrs. Danner herded them out, throwing Clara a knowing look over her shoulder. When they were alone, Luke reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Clara's heart began to pound as he opened it, revealing a simple gold band set with 3 small stones, a pearl flanked by 2 tiny diamonds. This isn't Martha's ring, Luke said quickly. That's still yours, when you're ready for it. But I wanted you to have something that was just for you, chosen specifically for you. He took a deep breath, and Clara realized with shock that he was nervous. Clara Weston, I know we agreed to wait, to give ourselves more time. But these past weeks, watching you with the girls, working beside you, learning who you are, I don't need more time to know what I want. I want you to be my wife. Not just in name, not just for practical reasons. I want to build a real marriage with you, a real partnership. I may not be able to promise you the kind of passionate love I had with Martha, but I can promise you something just as valuable. Loyalty, respect, genuine affection, and the absolute certainty that I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the gift you've given this family by staying. Clara's hands were shaking as she stared at the ring, then at Luke's earnest face. This wasn't the proposal she'd imagined back in Boston when she'd dreamed of marriage. There were no flowery declarations, no promises of eternal romance, but it was honest and real, and somehow more meaningful than any pretty words could have been. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Luke, I'll marry you." The smile that broke across his face was brilliant, transforming him from the serious, grief-worn rancher into someone younger, lighter. He took her hand carefully and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the stones catching the firelight and throwing tiny rainbows across the wall. "I love it," Clara said, admiring how it looked on her hand. "When did you have time to, I rode into town last week during that clear spell," Luke admitted. "Mrs. Jenkins at the general store helped me choose it. I wanted to give it to you on Christmas Day, wanted to start the new year with you as my fiancé." He paused, then added more quietly, "Is that all right? I know I said we'd wait, but Clara, I'm certain. If you need more time, I understand, but..." Clara silenced him by reaching up and touching his face, the gesture becoming familiar now. "I'm certain too," she said softly. "I think I have been for weeks. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid I was being foolish or rushing into something I'd regret. But Luke, this feels right. You feel right. This family, this life. It's what I've been searching for without knowing it." Luke caught her hand and pressed it more firmly against his cheek, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, they were bright with emotion. "I don't deserve you," he said roughly. "Don't deserve the second chance you're giving me, the way you've loved my daughters when you had no reason to." "I had every reason to," Clara interrupted. "They're wonderful children, and you do deserve this, Luke. You deserve happiness. We both do." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Luke leaned forward slowly, giving Clara time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His lips brushed hers gently, tentatively. A question and an answer, all at once. The kiss was brief and sweet, nothing like the passionate embraces described in novels, but it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that would grow deeper with time. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless and more than a little flustered. From the kitchen came the sound of the girls' laughter and Mrs. Danner's voice warning them not to eat all the cookie dough before it was baked. "Should we tell them?" Clara asked. Luke nodded. "They deserve to know. And Clara, they're going to be over the moon. They've been asking me almost daily when I was going to marry you and make you their real mother." Clara laughed, though tears pricked her eyes. "Have they really?" "Really?" Luke stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "Come on, let's go share the news before they burst with curiosity about why we sent them away." In the kitchen, they found the girls and Mrs. Danner rolling out cookie dough, flour dusting every surface, including the participants. Rosie looked up as they entered, her eyes immediately zeroing in on Clara's hand. "Miss Weston has a new ring," she announced, abandoning her rolling pin. Let me see, let me see." Clara held out her hand, and both girls crowded around to examine the ring with appropriate awe. Then Lily's eyes went wide with understanding. "Does this mean you're getting married?" she breathed. "You and Papa?" "It does," Luke confirmed. "Miss Weston has agreed to be my wife, which means she'll be your mother, your real, legal mother, if that's all right with you girls." For a moment, both children were utterly still, their faces a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Then Rosie said quietly, "But what about our first mama? Does this mean we're not supposed to remember her anymore?" Clara knelt down quickly, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "Your first mama will always be your mama. She loved you first, she brought you into this world, and nothing will ever change that. I could never replace her, and I wouldn't want to. But sweetheart, a person can have more than one mama. You'll have the mama you remember in your heart, and you'll have me here with you every day. Both can be true at the same time." Lily's lower lip trembled. So we don't have to choose? You never have to choose, Clara assured her. Your first mama would want you to be happy, to be loved and cared for. And I promise you, I will love you and care for you with everything I have. Not because I'm trying to take her place, but because you deserve to be loved. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, but they were happy tears. Both girls threw themselves at Clara, wrapping their arms around her neck and holding on tight. Over their heads, Clara met Luke's eyes and saw them suspiciously bright. So can we call you Mama? Rosie asked, her voice muffled against Clara's shoulder. Because Miss Weston is really long, and it feels weird now that you're marrying Papa. Clara laughed through her own tears. You can call me whatever feels right to you. Mama, Mother, Clara, I'll answer to anything as long as it comes from you. Mama Clara, this, Lily decided. So we remember there were two mamas who loved us. The simple wisdom of it made Clara's heart ache in the best possible way. Mama Clara it is, she agreed. Mrs. Danner, who'd been watching the whole scene with barely concealed emotion, cleared her throat loudly. Well, this calls for a celebration. Girls, stop crushing your new mama and help me finish these cookies. We need enough for the whole county, apparently, since I expect half the neighbors will be dropping by once word gets out about the engagement. The prediction proved accurate. By late afternoon, several families from neighboring ranches had arrived to offer congratulations. Word had spread with remarkable speed. Mrs. Peterson must have mentioned Luke's trip to the jewelry shop, and in a close-knit community like theirs, news of an engagement traveled faster than wildfire. The widow Jensen arrived with her famous apple pie. The Roberts family came with their brood of 5 children, who immediately swept Rosie and Lily outside for a raucous game of fox and geese in the snow. Reverend Michaels appeared with his wife, offering to perform the ceremony whenever the couple was ready. No need for a long engagement out here, the Reverend said jovially. The sooner you make it official, the better for everyone involved. These girls need a mother with legal standing, and you need a wife to help run this ranch properly, Luke. Clara noticed he didn't mention anything about love or romance, just practical considerations. It seemed that was how frontier marriages were often viewed, as partnerships necessary for survival rather than romantic ideals. It should have bothered her, but instead Clara found it oddly comforting. There was honesty in that approach, a lack of pretense that she appreciated. We were thinking late January, Luke said, glancing at Clara for confirmation. She nodded. Gives us time to prepare, but not so long that Clara has to endure months of being referred to as my fiancée instead of my wife. Late January it is, Reverend Michaels agreed. We'll do it at the church, have a proper celebration afterward. The whole community will want to attend. The thought of a church full of people watching her marry Luke should have been terrifying, but Clara found she was actually looking forward to it. These people had welcomed her, had accepted her despite her rocky arrival in Wyoming territory. She wanted to celebrate with them, wanted to publicly claim her place in this community. As the visitors continued throughout the day, Clara found herself swept up in a whirlwind of wedding planning. The women had opinions about everything: what she should wear, what food should be served, whether there should be dancing afterward. Mrs. Peterson offered to order fabric from Denver so Clara could have a proper wedding dress made. Mrs. Jensen insisted on making the wedding cake. Mrs. Roberts volunteered to organize the reception meal. You don't have to do all this, Clara protested, overwhelmed by their generosity. A simple ceremony would be fine. Nonsense, Mrs. Peterson said firmly. Luke McAllister is one of the pillars of this community, and you're going to be his wife. That deserves a proper celebration. Besides, dear, we haven't had a good wedding in months. Let us fuss. By the time the last visitors left in the early evening, Clara was exhausted but happy. The girls had worn themselves out playing and were already drooping over their supper. Mrs. Danner shooed everyone off to bed early, claiming she needed peace and quiet to clean up the chaos of the day's celebrations. Clara helped tuck the girls into bed, reading them their bedtime story while they fought to keep their eyes open. When she finished, Rosie reached up and touched Clara's cheek sleepily. Best Christmas ever, she murmured. We got a new mama. The simple statement made Clara's eyes sting with tears for what felt like the 100th time that day. She kissed both girls' foreheads and whispered goodnight, then slipped out into the hallway where Luke was waiting. They're asleep, he asked. Almost. It was a big day for them. For all of us. Luke gestured toward the stairs. Walk with me? I know it's cold, but I could use some air. They bundled into coats and stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear and brutally cold, their breath-forming clouds in the frigid air. Above them, stars blazed in such profusion that Clara felt dizzy looking up at them. I used to come out here after Martha died, Luke said quietly, staring up at the sky. Couldn't sleep most nights, so I'd stand here and look at the stars and try to understand why God would take her when we needed her so much. The girls were only 4 years old. They needed their mother. I needed my wife. It felt cruel, senseless. Clara waited silently, understanding he needed to say this. I never got an answer, Luke continued. Never understood why it happened. But standing here tonight, with you wearing my ring, with my daughters calling you Mama, I wonder if maybe this was always how it was supposed to go. If Martha had to leave so you could find your way to us. He turned to look at Clara, his face serious in the starlight. I know that sounds terrible, like I'm saying her death was meant to happen or that I'm glad it did. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean, Clara said softly. You're saying that sometimes terrible things happen, but good can still come from them. That doesn't make the terrible things less terrible, but it means they're not the end of the story. Exactly. Luke's shoulders relaxed slightly. I'll always love Martha, always miss her. But Clara, I'm genuinely happy tonight, not just grateful or content, but actually happy. And I don't think Martha would begrudge me that. I think she'd be glad the girls have you, that I have you. Clara moved closer to him, and Luke wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side for warmth. They stood like that for a long time, looking up at the infinite stars, neither feeling the need to fill the silence with words. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. The fabric Mrs. Peterson ordered arrived, and Clara spent her evening sewing her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Danner and several of the neighboring women who would arrive unannounced to assist. The dress was simple but lovely, dove gray rather than white, practical enough to be worn again for church or special occasions. Clara embroidered small flowers along the collar and cuffs, her stitches neat and even. The girls were beside themselves with excitement, chattering constantly about the wedding and what it would mean. They helped Clara practice her vows, played wedding with their dolls, and drove Mrs. Danner to distraction with their endless questions about every aspect of the celebration. Luke seemed more nervous as the date approached. Clara would catch him watching her with an expression that mixed anticipation and anxiety, and she wondered what he was thinking. Was he having second thoughts? Comparing her to Martha and finding her wanting? But whenever she asked if he was all right, he'd smile and assure her he was fine, just preoccupied with ranch business. 3 days before this wedding, a blizzard swept through that had everyone worried the ceremony would need to be postponed. The snow came down so thick and fast that visibility dropped to mere feet. Luke and his ranch hands worked around the clock to keep the cattle safe and the buildings secure. Clara kept the home fires burning, kept the girls occupied and calm, and tried not to worry about Luke out in the dangerous conditions. When he finally stumbled in late on the second night, half frozen and exhausted, Clara had hot water ready for him to wash and warm food waiting. She helped him out of his ice-crusted coat, noting with concern how his hands shook from the cold. "You need to get warm," she said firmly, guiding him to a chair by the fire. "Mrs. Danner, can you bring extra blankets?" "I'm fine," Luke protested, but his chattering teeth betrayed him. "You're half frozen," Clara corrected. "And you're no good to anyone if you catch pneumonia 3 days before our wedding." Despite his exhaustion, Luke managed to smile at that. "Wouldn't want to miss my own wedding." "Then let me take care of you." Clara knelt and began unlacing his boots, pulling off the frozen leather carefully. His feet were like ice even through his thick socks. She rubbed them briskly to restore circulation, ignoring his protests that she shouldn't be doing such menial work. "We're going to be married in 3 days," Clara reminded him. "In sickness and in health, remember? I might as well start practicing now." Luke's expression softened, and he reached down to touch her hair gently. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured. "Finding you at that train station, it was the best thing that ever happened to me." The words, so simply stated, made Clara's heart swell. "I'm the lucky one," she said quietly. "You gave me a home when I had nothing, a family when I was alone, A future when I thought mine was over. Then we're both lucky, Luke decided. He pulled her up and into his lap, wrapping his arms around her despite Mrs. Danner's scandalized clearing of her throat from the doorway. God, you feel warm. Clara laughed and let herself relax against him, sharing her warmth. Outside, the wind howled and the snow continued to fall, but inside they were safe and warm and together. That was all that mattered. The blizzard finally blew itself out the morning before the wedding, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, but the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Luke and several neighbors spent the day clearing the road to the church, determined that nothing would prevent the ceremony from happening as planned. That night, Clara lay awake in her room for the last time as Clara Weston. Tomorrow, she would become Clara McAllister. Tomorrow, she would legally become mother to Rosie and Lily, wife to Luke. Tomorrow, her new life would officially begin. She wasn't nervous, she realized. She was ready. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called quietly. The door opened to reveal both girls in their nightgowns, their faces solemn in the lamplight. "We couldn't sleep," Lily said. "Can we stay with you, just for tonight?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Of course, come here." The girls scrambled into her bed, snuggling close on either side of her. Clara put her arms around them, holding them tight. "Are you scared?" Rosie asked. "About tomorrow?" "Not scared," Clara said honestly. "Excited. Happy. Maybe a little nervous, but in a good way." "We're happy too," Lily said. "Papa's been so much better since you came. He smiles now. He laughs. Before you it was like he was here, but not really here, you know?" Clara's throat tightened at the child's perceptiveness. "I know, sweetheart." "And we love you," Rosie added firmly. "We know you're not our first mama, but you're our mama now, and we love you so much." "I love you too," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "Both of you, so very much." They lay together in the quiet darkness, and eventually the girls' breathing deepened into sleep. Clara held them close, these 2 precious children who'd become hers so unexpectedly, and felt gratitude wash over her in waves. Tomorrow she would marry Luke McAllister. Tomorrow she would become the mother these girls needed. Tomorrow she would start building the life she'd traveled so far to find, and she couldn't wait. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the world sparkling under its fresh blanket of snow. Clara rose early, careful not to wake the girls who'd spent the night in her bed, and found Mrs. Danner already preparing a special breakfast. "Today's the day," the housekeeper said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Are you ready?" "I am," Clara said simply, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The hours before the ceremony passed in a flurry of activity. The women arrived to help Clara dress and arrange her hair. The girls were outfitted in new dresses Mrs. Danner had made, matching blue velvet that brought out the color of their eyes. Luke disappeared to the church early with the ranch hands, leaving the house to the women's preparations. When Clara finally stood before the mirror in her gray dress, her hair pinned up with small flowers woven through it, she barely recognized herself. She looked different than she had in Boston, healthier, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. She looked like someone who belonged, someone who had found her place in the world. "You're beautiful," Mrs. Danner said gruffly, dabbing at her eyes. "Luke's going to forget how to breathe when he sees you." The ride to the church seemed to take both forever and no time at all. The small building was packed with people, ranchers and their families from all over the county, all dressed in their Sunday best. When Clara walked through the door with the girls on either side of her, holding her hands tightly, a hush fell over the congregation. At the front of the church, standing beside Reverend Michaels, Luke waited. He wore a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. And when his eyes found Clara's, the expression on his face made her breath catch. He looked at her like she was something precious, something miraculous, something worth waiting for. Clara walked down the aisle with her head high, the girls keeping pace beside her. When they reached the front, Rosie and Lily took their seats in the front pew beside Mrs. Danner, and Luke reached for Clara's hands. "You're beautiful," he whispered, so only she could hear. "So are you," Clara whispered back, making him smile. Reverend Michaels began the ceremony, his voice carrying through the small church. The traditional words washed over Clara: love, honor, cherish, in sickness and health, for better or worse. She'd heard these vows before at other weddings, but they'd never meant so much as they did now, spoken in this rough frontier church, to this man who'd given her everything. When it came time for the rings, Luke slipped the band onto her finger just above the engagement ring. His hands were steady, his voice firm as he repeated his vows. Then it was Clara's turn. She'd asked Mrs. Danner to hold Martha's original wedding ring, and now she took it and slipped it onto Luke's finger, a symbol of continuity and new beginnings both. "I do," she said clearly when Reverend Michaels asked if she took this man to be her husband, now and always. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Michaels declared. "Luke, you may kiss your bride." Luke cupped Clara's face gently in his hands and kissed her softly, a promise and a beginning all at once. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and when they broke apart, both were smiling. "Mrs. McAllister," Luke said, testing out the name. "Mr. McAllister," Clara replied, and they both laughed at the formality of it. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic. The church basement had been transformed into a reception hall, tables laden with food contributed by every family in the county. There was music and dancing, the girls spinning until they were dizzy while the adults clapped and stamped their feet. Clara found herself passed from partner to partner as seemed to be tradition, dancing with neighbors and strangers and friends alike. But her favorite dance was with Luke, late in the afternoon when the celebration was finally winding down. They swayed together to a fiddle playing a slow, sweet tune, and Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Happy?" Luke asked softly. "Impossibly happy," Clara confirmed. "You?" "More than I ever thought I'd be again," Luke admitted. "Thank you, Clara, for saying yes, for staying, for loving my daughters, for giving me another chance at this." Clara pulled back enough to look up at him. "Thank you for asking me to come home with you that day at the station. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else just saw a rejected bride. Thank you for giving me a family." Luke's eyes were suspiciously bright as he pulled her close again. "We should probably head back to the ranch soon," he murmured. "The girls are flagging, and I want to get home before dark." "Home," Clara echoed, loving the sound of the word. "Yes, let's go home." They gathered the girls, who protested that they weren't tired despite barely being able to keep their eyes open, and said their goodbyes to the lingering guests. Mrs. Danner had returned to the ranch earlier to prepare a special supper, and Luke's ranch hands had promised to handle evening chores so the family could have the evening to themselves. The wagon ride back to Wind Creek Ranch was peaceful, the girls dozing in the back while Clara sat close to Luke on the seat. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Everything looked magical, transformed, like a scene from a fairy tale. "I can't believe this is my life now," Clara said softly. 6 weeks ago, I was standing on a train platform with nothing but a trunk and a broken heart. Now I have a husband, 2 daughters, a home. It doesn't feel real. "It's real," Luke assured her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "This is your life now, Clara, our life. And it's only going to get better from here." As Wind Creek Ranch came into view, smoke curling from the chimneys and lights glowing warmly in the windows, Clara knew he was right. This was her life now. This was her family, her home, her future. She wasn't a rejected bride anymore. She wasn't an unwanted relation taking up space in someone else's life. She was Clara McAllister, wife and mother, a woman who belonged, and she had never been happier. The first weeks of marriage brought adjustments Clara hadn't fully anticipated. Moving from the guest room down the hall to Luke's room on the 3rd floor felt momentous, symbolic of the change in her status from governess to wife. The room that had been his and Martha's was now theirs, and though Luke had carefully packed away most of Martha's personal belongings before the wedding, her presence still lingered in unexpected ways. A scent that clung to the wardrobe, a hairpin discovered behind the washstand, the way the floorboards creaked in a particular pattern that Luke said Martha had always used to sneak back to bed without waking him. Clara had expected to feel like an interloper in that space, but Luke's quiet consideration made it easier. He'd cleared half the wardrobe for her clothes, moved his things to make room for hers on the washstand, and brought up a small writing desk from the unused parlor so she'd have a space of her own for correspondence and lesson planning. The journal he'd given her at Christmas sat on that desk now, its pages beginning to fill with her thoughts, observations about the girl's progress, and reflections on her new life. Their physical relationship developed gradually, with a gentleness that touched Clara deeply. Luke never pushed, never demanded, always checking to make sure she was comfortable. Their wedding night had been tender rather than passionate, both of them nervous and careful with each other. But with each passing day, the awkwardness faded, replaced by growing comfort and genuine affection that deepened into something Clara hadn't quite expected. Not the wild, consuming love of romance novels, but something steadier and perhaps more valuable. A love built on mutual respect, shared laughter, and the everyday intimacy of building a life together. The girls adjusted to the change with remarkable ease, seeming to take it as natural that Clara now shared their father's room and bore his name. They'd started calling her Mama Clara consistently, and the title never failed to make Clara's heart squeeze with joy. She'd worried they might feel displaced or jealous of her new closeness with Luke, but instead they seemed to bloom under the security of having a complete family again. Winter deepened its grip on Wyoming territory through February and into March. The snow piled higher, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the pitchers overnight, despite the fires burning in every room. Clara learned to manage the household through the brutal season, working alongside Mrs. Danner to keep everyone warm, fed, and occupied during the long months of confinement. The lessons with the girls continued to progress beautifully. Both were reading chapter books now. Their handwriting had improved dramatically, and they'd mastered basic arithmetic. Clara had begun teaching them geography, using the globe Luke had purchased in Cheyenne, and the girls were fascinated by the idea of oceans and distant continents. Sometimes in the evenings, the whole family would gather around the globe while Clara told them about places she'd read about: the pyramids of Egypt, the canals of Venice, the great cities of Europe. "Will we ever see those places?" Lily asked one night, her finger tracing the outline of France on the globe. "Maybe someday," Clara said. "The world is getting smaller every year. More trains, more ships. Who knows what will be possible by the time you're grown?" "I want to see Paris," Rosie declared. "Mrs. Peterson said it's the most beautiful city in the world." "Then we'll have to make sure your French lessons are excellent," Clara teased. "Can't visit Paris without speaking French." Luke caught her eye from across the room where he sat mending a bridle, and his smile was warm. He loved hearing her talk with the girls about the wider world, loved the way she opened up their imaginations beyond the confines of the ranch. More than once, he'd told Clara that she was the best thing that had ever happened to his daughters. But not everything was easy. In late February, a crisis struck that tested them all. It started with Lily complaining of a headache during morning lessons. Clara felt the child's forehead and found it warm, but not alarmingly so. She sent Lily to rest, thinking it was just a minor ailment, but by afternoon, Lily's fever had spiked dangerously high, and she was crying with pain, clutching her head and her stomach. "Get Luke," Clara told Mrs. Danner urgently, "and we need the doctor, now." Luke rode through a blizzard to fetch Dr. Morrison from town, an elderly physician who'd been practicing medicine in Wyoming for 30 years. The old doctor examined Lily thoroughly, while Clara held the girl's hand and tried not to let her own terror show. "Could be several things," Dr. Morrison said grimly. "Influenza, scarlet fever, or if we're very unlucky, meningitis. We won't know for certain for a day or two. In the meantime, keep her fever down with cool compresses, get fluids in her if you can, and pray." The next 3 days were the longest of Clara's life. She barely left Lily's side, sponging the child's burning skin with cool water, coaxing her to take sips of broth, singing soft songs when Lily cried with pain. Luke spent most of his time in the sick room too, holding his daughter's other hand, his face gray with fear. They'd both lived through losing Martha to illness, and the terror of losing Lily too hung over them like a shroud. Rosie was distraught, wanting to be with her twin, but kept away for fear of contagion. She stationed herself outside the bedroom door, refusing to leave her post, calling out encouragements to her sister through the wooden panels. "You have to get better, Lily," she called. "You promised we'd go catch frogs in the creek when spring came. You can't break a promise." On the third night, when Lily's fever finally broke and she opened her eyes clearly for the first time in days, Clara burst into tears of relief. Luke pulled her into his arms, and they held each other while Mrs. Danner thanked God in a shaking voice, and Rosie burst through the door to throw herself on her sister's bed. "You came back," Rosie sobbed. "I was so scared you were going to leave like Mama did." "I'm not going anywhere," Lily said weakly, but with a ghost of her usual spirit. "Takes more than a fever to get rid of me." Dr. Morrison, who'd been staying at the ranch to monitor Lily's condition, examined her again and declared it had likely been a severe case of influenza complicated by an ear infection, but that she was past the worst of it. "She'll need rest and good food for a few weeks to regain her strength," he advised, "but she'll recover fully." As the doctor prepared to leave, he pulled Clara aside. "You did well," he said quietly. "Many women would have panicked, but you kept calm and did everything right. You've got a natural gift for nursing." The praise warmed Clara, but more importantly, the crisis had shown her something about herself and her new family. When it mattered most, they'd pulled together. Luke had trusted her judgment completely, following her lead in Lily's care. Mrs. Danner had supported her without question, and Clara had discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed, the fierce, protective love of a mother willing to fight heaven itself to keep her child safe. "I love them," she told Luke later that night, as they finally collapsed into their own bed after 3 days of barely sleeping. "Not just the girls, though God knows I love them with everything in me. But Luke, I love you too. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly, but it has. This isn't just a practical arrangement anymore. This is real." Luke rolled to face her in the darkness, his hand finding hers. "I love you too," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I didn't think I could feel this way again. Thought that part of me died with Martha. But Clara, you've brought me back to life. These past months with you, they've been a gift I didn't think I deserved." "We both deserve this," Clara said firmly. "We both deserve happiness. And Luke, I want you to know, I'm not threatened by your love for Martha. She was your first love, the mother of your children, and she'll always have a place in your heart. But there's room for me too. I know that now." Luke pulled her close, and they held each other in the darkness, two people who'd found their way to each other through loss and chance, and the simple courage to keep trying. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside they were warm and safe and together. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory, teasing them with false starts and sudden setbacks. A warm week in late March would melt some of the snow, revealing muddy ground and the first hints of green grass, only to be followed by another blizzard that buried everything again. But gradually, persistently, winter's grip loosened. By April, the snow had finally retreated except in the deepest shadows, and the ranch came alive with activity. Calves were being born, which meant sleepless nights for Luke and his ranch hands checking on the cattle. Clara helped where she could, learning to bottle feed orphaned calves and assist with difficult births. The work was messy and exhausting, but there was something deeply satisfying about helping bring new life into the world. The girls were allowed outside again after months of confinement, and they ran wild with joy, reacquainting themselves with their favorite haunts around the ranch. Clara often watched them from the porch, marveling at their energy and resilience. Lily had recovered completely from her illness, showing no lingering effects, except perhaps being slightly more cautious than her sister, which was probably no bad thing. True to his Christmas promise, Luke began teaching Clara to ride. Cinnamon proved to be as gentle and patient as he'd promised, tolerating Clara's initial nervousness and clumsy attempts at controlling the reins. The first few lessons were exercises in humiliation. Clara had never realized how difficult it was to stay balanced on a moving horse, or how much her legs would ache afterward. But Luke was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, never laughing at her mistakes. "You're doing beautifully," he told her after a particularly successful lesson where she'd managed to trot without bouncing around like a sack of potatoes. "Another few weeks, and you'll be ready to ride out with me to check the herd." The idea thrilled Clara. She wanted to see the full extent of Wind Creek Ranch, wanted to understand the land that was now hers as much as Luke's. And there was something liberating about being on horseback, about the sense of freedom it gave her. One warm afternoon in late April, Luke surprised her by suggesting they take a ride together, just the two of them. Mrs. Danner would watch the girls for a few hours, and they could explore the northern section of the ranch that Clara hadn't yet seen. They rode out side by side, Clara on Cinnamon, and Luke on his big bay gelding, Duke. The landscape was transforming rapidly now. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides in splashes of yellow and purple. The grass was growing thick and green, and birds filled the air with their songs. The sky stretched overhead in endless blue, dotted with white clouds that drifted lazily. Luke led her to a spot he called Eagle Ridge, a high point that overlooked much of the ranch. From there, Claire could see the ranch house nestled in its valley, the cattle scattered across the pastures like brown and black dots, and in the distance, the mountains still white-capped with snow. "This is beautiful," Clara breathed, dismounting carefully and walking to the edge of the overlook. "I had no idea the ranch was this large." 3,000 acres, Luke said, coming to stand beside her. "My father homesteaded the original section when I was just a boy. After he died, I bought the adjacent parcels bit by bit, building it up to what it is now. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's ours. And now it's yours too." Clara turned to look at him, seeing the pride in his face as he surveyed his land. "Do you ever regret not going back east?" she asked. "You could have had an easier life in a city." Luke shook his head. "Never. This land, it gets in your blood. The freedom of it, the challenge. Every year brings new obstacles to overcome, new problems to solve. But when you succeed, when you see your herd healthy and your family thriving, there's no feeling like it." He paused, then added more quietly, "I'm glad you're here to share it with me, Clara. It means more, somehow, having someone who understands what this place represents." "I'm glad I'm here too," Clara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman with no prospects and no future. Now she stood on a windswept ridge overlooking land that stretched to the horizon, married to a man she loved, mother to 2 precious children, part of a community that had welcomed her. Her life bore no resemblance to what she'd planned, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. Luke stepped closer and put his arm around her waist, and they stood together looking out over Wind Creek Ranch. Clara leaned into him, feeling his solid warmth, and thought about the telegram that had shattered her life half a year ago. Marriage arrangement terminated. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything. Now she understood it had been the beginning. In May, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. The fatigue she'd attributed to spring work, the queasiness she'd blamed on something she ate, the way her monthly courses had ceased. When she finally confided her suspicions to Mrs. Danner, the older woman took one look at her and smiled knowingly. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," Mrs. Danner said. "I've been through enough pregnancies with Martha and other women on nearby ranches to recognize the signs. How far along do you think you are?" "Maybe 2 months?" Clara said, still trying to wrap her mind around it. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Luke's baby. "Should I tell him, or wait until I'm more certain?" "Tell him," Mrs. Danner advised. "That man deserves to know he's going to be a father again. And Clara, he's going to be over the moon." Mrs. Danner was right. When Clara told Luke that evening after the girls were in bed, his face transformed. He pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that made her eyes sting with tears. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby. Clara, are you happy about this? I know we didn't plan—" "I'm thrilled," Clara interrupted, laughing through her tears, terrified but thrilled. "Luke, we're going to have a child together. I never thought, after everything that happened, I'd given up on the idea of having children of my own. And now you're going to be a mother 3 times over," Luke finished. He pulled back to look at her face, his own eyes bright with emotion. "When? When will the baby come?" "If my calculations are right, sometime in December or early January," Clara said. "Right around Christmas, perhaps." "Best Christmas present I could ask for," Luke said, then kissed her thoroughly, his joy palpable. They told the girls at breakfast the next morning, unsure how they'd react to the news of a new sibling. But Rosie and Lily surprised them by being ecstatic. "A baby!" Rosie squealed. "Can it be a girl? I want a sister." "I want to teach it things," Lily added eagerly, "like how to read and catch frogs and make snow angels." "The baby won't be able to do any of that for a while," Clara cautioned, laughing at their enthusiasm. "Newborns are very small and helpless. They need a lot of care and attention." "We'll help," Rosie promised solemnly. We'll be the best big sisters ever." As Clara's pregnancy progressed through the summer months, she found herself marveling at how her body changed to accommodate new life. She'd seen pregnant women before, of course, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. Mrs. Danner and the neighboring women offered endless advice, some helpful and some contradictory, but all given with genuine care. The pregnancy was mercifully easy. After the first months of fatigue and nausea passed, Clara felt better than ever. She continued teaching the girls their lessons, though she had to modify some activities as her body grew unwieldy. She helped Mrs. Danner with household tasks, though the older woman increasingly shooed her away from anything too strenuous. And she spent long evenings with Luke on the porch, his hand resting on her swelling belly, both of them lost in wonder at the life growing between them. "Have you thought about names?" Luke asked one night in late August, when the baby's movements had become strong enough to feel from the outside. "Some," Clara admitted. "If it's a girl, I was thinking maybe Grace, and if it's a boy—" She paused, then said carefully, "What was your father's name?" "Samuel," Luke said, surprised. "Sam for short. Why?" "I'd like to honor him," Clara said. "He built this ranch, created this legacy. If we have a son, I'd like to call him Samuel Luke, if that's all right with you." Luke's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "He would have loved that," he said roughly. "Would have loved you too. You're exactly the kind of strong woman he always said was needed to survive out here." As autumn painted the hills in shades of gold and crimson, Clara felt herself settling deeper into her role as wife, mother, and partner in the ranch. She'd learned so much over the past year: how to read weather signs, how to preserve food for winter, how to manage a household in an isolated location, how to be part of a community. But more than skills, she'd learned about herself. She was stronger than she'd known, braver than she'd imagined, capable of love she hadn't thought possible. The neighboring women threw her a small celebration in October, gathering at the ranch with gifts for the coming baby. Tiny gowns they'd sewn, soft blankets they'd knitted, practical items like nappies and receiving cloths. Clara was overwhelmed by their generosity and the way they'd truly accepted her as one of their own. "You've done well here," Mrs. Peterson told her, as the women sat together in the sunshine, their hands busy with needlework. "When Luke brought you home last year, there were some who wondered if a city girl could manage ranch life. But you've proved yourself 10 times over. You're one of us now, Clara." The simple statement meant more than any fancy words could have. She'd found her place, her people, her purpose. November brought the first serious snows, and Clara began preparing in earnest for the baby's arrival. Dr. Morrison came out to check on her, pronouncing her healthy and the baby well-positioned. He promised to come as soon as Luke sent word that her labor had begun, weather permitting, but also made sure Mrs. Danner knew what to do in case he couldn't make it through a storm. "Babies come on their own schedule," he said cheerfully, "and they don't much care about blizzards or inconvenient timing." The waiting became harder as December approached. Clara was huge now, uncomfortable, unable to sleep properly, and ready for the pregnancy to be over. Luke treated her like she was made of glass, which was sweet but occasionally frustrating. The girls hovered protectively, bringing her cushions and cups of tea and reading to her to keep her entertained. "I feel like a beached whale," Clara complained to Mrs. Danner one afternoon when even simple tasks left her breathless. "Won't be much longer now," Mrs. Danner assured her. "Baby's dropped. You're carrying lower than you were last week. Could be any day." Any day turned out to be December 18th in the middle of a snowstorm. Clara woke just before dawn with the first contractions, mild but unmistakable. She lay quietly for a moment, not wanting to wake Luke unnecessarily if this was false labor. But when another contraction came 15 minutes later, she knew it was time. "Luke," she said softly, shaking his shoulder. "The baby's coming." Luke was instantly awake, his eyes going wide with a mixture of excitement and panic. "Now? Are you sure? Should I get Dr. Morrison?" "Not yet," Clara said, surprisingly calm. "The contractions are still far apart, but you should probably alert Mrs. Danner. And Luke, try not to panic. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Martha panicked," Luke said, already pulling on his clothes. "Both times. She was terrified of childbirth." Clara saw the shadow cross his face, the memory of loss. She reached for his hand. "I'm not Martha," she said gently. And this isn't the same situation. I'm going to be fine, and so is the baby. Luke kissed her fiercely. You'd better be. I just found you. I'm not losing you now. The day that followed was long and exhausting. Mrs. Danner took charge immediately, her calm competence a blessing. The girls were sent to stay with the ranch hands in the bunkhouse, much to their disappointment, but Clara didn't want them frightened by her pain. Luke sent one of the hands to fetch Dr. Morrison, but as the storm intensified, it became clear the doctor might not make it through. Doesn't matter, Mrs. Danner said firmly. I've helped birth dozens of babies. We'll manage fine. And they did. As the day wore on and the contractions grew stronger, Clara found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Luke stayed with her despite Mrs. Danner's suggestion that he might prefer to wait downstairs, as was traditional. He held Clara's hand, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, murmured encouragements when the pain grew overwhelming. You're doing so well, he told her during a particularly difficult contraction. So strong, so brave. I'm in awe of you. Finally, as evening fell and the storm outside reached its peak, Clara felt the overwhelming urge to push. Mrs. Danner checked her progress and nodded with satisfaction. It's time, she said. Next contraction, you push with all your might. The next hour was a blur of pain and effort, and Mrs. Danner's steady voice guiding her through it. And then, just when Clara thought she couldn't possibly continue, there was a sudden release of pressure, and a thin, angry wail filled the room. It's a boy, Mrs. Danner announced triumphantly, holding up a squalling, red-faced infant. A healthy, beautiful boy. Clara burst into tears of relief and joy as Mrs. Danner cleaned the baby quickly and placed him on her chest. He was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Clara touched his cheek with one trembling finger, overwhelmed by the instant, fierce love that flooded through her. Samuel, she whispered. Samuel Luke McAllister. Welcome to the world, little one. Luke was crying too, no shame in the tears that streaked his face as he looked at his son. He's perfect, he said hoarsely. Clara, you're perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this gift. Dr. Morrison arrived an hour later, having fought through the storm, but mother and baby were already doing well. He examined them both, pronounced everything satisfactory, and congratulated the family on their newest member. When the girls were finally allowed to meet their baby brother, their reactions were everything Clara could have hoped for. They approached cautiously, eyes wide with wonder. And when Clara offered to let them hold him carefully, they handled him with such gentle reverence that her heart swelled. He's so tiny, Rosie breathed. Was I this tiny once? You both were, Luke confirmed. And now you're big sisters again. That's an important job. We'll protect him, Lily promised solemnly, and teach him everything we know, and love him forever and ever. I know you will, Clara said softly. You're wonderful big sisters. That night, after the excitement had settled and everyone had gone to bed, Clara lay with baby Samuel sleeping in a cradle beside the bed, while Luke dozed in a chair he'd pulled close. She felt exhausted and sore, but more content than she'd ever been in her life. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the telegram that had destroyed her plans, the desperate moment on the train platform, Luke's unexpected offer, the slow building of trust and affection into genuine love. A year ago, she'd thought her life was over. Now, looking at her sleeping son and her devoted husband and knowing her daughter slept safely down the hall, she understood that it had actually been just beginning. Christmas that year was quiet but perfect. Clara was still recovering from childbirth, so there was no trip to church for services, but Reverend Michaels came to them, bringing half the congregation along. The small ranch house was packed with neighbors who'd come to meet the newest McAllister and bring gifts and food and well wishes. Baby Samuel slept through most of the celebration, unbothered by the noise and commotion. The girls were beside themselves with pride, showing him off to anyone who would look and reporting breathlessly on every small thing he did, how he'd sneezed that morning, how he'd gripped Rosie's finger, how he made funny faces in his sleep. Clara sat in the rocking chair by the fire, still not quite believing this was her life. A year ago, she'd been heartbroken and lost. Now she was surrounded by family and friends, holding her newborn son, watching her daughters play, meeting her husband's eyes across the room, and seeing in them the same wonder and gratitude she felt. Mrs. Peterson approached with a cup of tea and a knowing smile. "You've come a long way from the woman who stepped off that train last November," she observed. "Barely recognize you now." "I barely recognize myself," Clara admitted. "Everything changed that day." "Best thing that ever happened to you, I'd say," Mrs. Peterson said. "And to Luke and those girls. You were meant to be here, Clara. Some things are just destiny." After the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Clara and Luke sat together on the porch, despite the cold, bundled in heavy coats and watching the stars. Samuel was asleep in Clara's arms, a warm, solid weight. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Patterson hadn't sent that telegram?" Luke asked quietly. "If you'd married him like you planned?" Clara considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I think about the life I would have had. Probably respectable but joyless. Patterson was a weak man, not unkind, but not particularly kind either. I would have been a merchant's wife in a small town, probably lonely, probably always wondering if there was something more." She looked down at Samuel's sleeping face, then over at Luke. "But then I wouldn't have this. Wouldn't have you, or the girls, or Samuel, wouldn't have found my place in the world. So no, I don't regret that telegram. It hurt at the time, but it set me free to find what I was really meant for." "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gone to town that day," Luke said. "If I hadn't been at the station at exactly the right moment. If I hadn't had the courage to approach you." He shook his head wonderingly. So many small choices that led to this moment. "Not choices," Clara corrected softly. "Destiny, like Mrs. Peterson said. We were meant to find each other, Luke. You needed someone to help you heal and to love your daughters. I needed a home and a family. And somehow, against all odds, we found exactly what we needed in each other." Luke pulled her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I love you, Clara McAllister, more than I ever thought I could love again. You've given me everything." "And you've given me the same," Clara replied. "A home, a family, a purpose, and love. What more could anyone ask for?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Inside, the girls were asleep in their beds, Mrs. Danner was tidying the kitchen, and the house was warm and safe. Clara thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, frightened, heartbroken, certain her life was over. If she could go back and tell that woman what awaited her, she'd hardly believe it. But it had all come true, every impossible, wonderful bit of it. She'd been a rejected bride at a train station, abandoned and alone. And then a rancher with desperate eyes and 2 wild-haired daughters had offered her a chance. Just 2 weeks, he'd said. Just 2 weeks to see if she might fit into their lives. Those 2 weeks had become forever. Spring arrived early the following year, and with it came a sense of renewal that seemed to touch everything at Wind Creek Ranch. Baby Samuel grew strong and healthy, his thin newborn cry developing into lusty demands for attention. The girls were devoted big sisters, always ready to help with him, to make him smile, to show him the wonders of their world. Clara's days were full to bursting, teaching the girls their lessons, caring for Samuel, helping Mrs. Danner manage the household, and slowly learning to be a true partner to Luke in running the ranch. She'd started keeping the ranch books, having discovered she had a head for figures. She consulted with Luke on business decisions, offering insights he hadn't considered. They were building something together, truly together, and it showed in the prosperity of the ranch. One warm May afternoon, Clara saddled Cinnamon and rode out to meet Luke where he was checking on the new calves in the north pasture. Samuel was strapped securely to her back in a carrier Mrs. Danner had fashioned, sleeping peacefully against her. The ride that would have terrified her a year ago now felt natural, the horse responding easily to her commands. When she reached Luke, he grinned at the sight of her. "Look at you," he said admiringly. "A proper rancher's wife, riding out to check on her herd with her baby on her back." "Our herd," Clara corrected, dismounting carefully. "And yes, I suppose I am. Strange how life works out, isn't it?" Luke helped her down and pulled her into an embrace, mindful of the baby between them. "Not strange," he said. "Perfect. This is exactly how it was meant to be." They stood together on the hillside, looking out over the land that was theirs, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains rising in the distance. Behind them, back at the ranch house, two little girls were probably getting into some kind of mischief. Ahead of them stretched years of hard work, challenges to overcome, joys to celebrate, and a life to build together. Clara leaned into her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, the baby's gentle weight against her chest, and the endless Wyoming sky above them. She'd come here broken and afraid, a woman with nothing but a torn dress and a shattered dream. But Luke McAllister had seen something in her that day at the train station. He'd seen strength she hadn't known she possessed. He'd seen potential for love when all she'd felt was loss. He'd seen a future when all she'd seen was an ending. "Be my wife," he'd begged. "My twins need a mother like you." And then she'd said yes. The bravest, best yes of her entire life. Now standing on this hillside with her family all around her and her future stretching bright before her, Clara understood what she'd been too hurt to see back then. She hadn't been rejected at that train station. She'd been redirected, sent exactly where she needed to go, to the people who needed her, to the life she was meant to live. She was home. Finally, completely, eternally home. And it was more beautiful than anything she could have ever planned.